Thank you, members. I declare the meeting now open to the public online, and I'd like to welcome all of our members who are participating by video conferencing today, that being Carol Nichillen, Paula Bradshaw, Jonathan Buckley, Orlia Flynn, Cara Hunter and Pam Cameron at this point in time. Are members aware of any apologies? No, and no apologies received? No. Okay, thank you. Members, going then to Chairperson's business. The first item I wanted to raise in relation to this today is I did a meeting this week with a very large group of domiciliary care workers. Principally, there were other care workers there as well, from right across the north. And I have to say, the amount of issues that sector are facing are absolutely massive. Domiciliary care workers, first of all, they start off from a very low-paid base in the first instance. They're also, and it emerged from the meeting last night, and one of the issues that was raised was that in some cases they're not getting expenses. At times, care workers are being asked to staff a rota from 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, with absolutely no indication or guarantee of what hours they might actually be working during those times. There's differences in terms of how independent staff are being remunerated versus trust staff, and members are not getting expenses, workers are not getting expenses travelling between jobs. And additionally, there was an issue raised whereby if a domiciliary care worker has to wait for an ambulance to arrive, if he or she arrives at a call and an ambulance is required, they have to wait, and that is very often not even taken as part of their working hours, and they don't get paid for that. So there's massive issues there, and I think we're all very keenly aware of how much that sector has supported and the role they have played throughout the pandemic. And I think we owe them a debt of gratitude in that sense. We also owe them proper working terms and conditions, and we owe it to the people they're caring for that we have a properly resourced, a properly staffed and a properly paid workforce in that respect. And the other issue that was raised during the meeting was the issue around the pay, the £500 COVID recognition payment. And we are aware, members, that core healthcare staff have received that payment. We did raise it with the Minister here last week, and he indicated that they were looking at how many staff are involved in that cohort. However, I was disappointed, and I said to the Minister here last week that I was disappointed, and I think staff will be very disappointed that there is no definitive date for when they will receive that payment, and that payment would only be, it was described during the meeting that I did as a sticking plaster, but it would be some recognition of the value we hold that staff, and the fact that some staff have now got it and other staff out there across a range of sectors, including staff who work in GP practices, staff who work in dental practices, staff who work in the independent and in the private settings, and indeed agency staff working alongside other staff in wards. So, members, I was going to I think that we need to get a longer-term series of solutions to the domiciliary care issue, to recognise that workforce and to provide career progression. But as a small step, I think it's only fair that the Department and the Minister would provide a definitive date for when that staff can expect that money. We're in the run-up to Christmas. We're aware of all the pressures that are going on with all those other issues. And I think it's only fair that we would ask that a definitive date be given to those domiciliary and other care workers who have not received the COVID recognition payment, that a date would be provided. Would members be content that we write to the Department along those lines and ask that that be done? Yeah. Pam, were you looking in there?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, I would like to second that if that's a proposal. I think it is unacceptable that it has been this length of time, and yet there's so many people who have worked so hard in the most stressful conditions throughout this pandemic still haven't received their payment. I know my office is inundated with requests, and I know other MIs are the same in terms of queries around where this payment is. And I think, as well as that, you're right to mention the terms and conditions that these workers are working under, and I don't think it's acceptable. And I think there's another view that we need to pay cognizance of as well, and that's from the patient or service user end, because obviously these caring needs can be very intimate, very personal, and yet patients and service users are often with no notice, basically faced with strangers in their bedroom, giving them personal care because of the instability of that profession. So I think that there are many issues that need to be delved into in terms of domiciliary care in particular. But I think it's absolutely right that they get this recognition payment and they get it as swiftly as possible, and that hasn't happened to date.
Thank you, Pam. So are members then content with that proposal? Yeah, thank you, members. Okay, members, moving on to, I want to acknowledge the report that has been published in terms of the mother and baby institutions. I think that's a very important step forward for those survivors and victims and families who were impacted by that horrendous scandal. And I also welcome the fact that there has been an indication that the PSNI are looking at what criminal charges may apply. But I just wanted to acknowledge the work of the panel. They have met with the committee here and they have outlined how they engaged with the sectors, and I think it would those impacted by this would appear to certainly welcome the publication of the report, and I suppose we will all want to look at it in detail. I do welcome the fact that the Minister last week committed to addressing swiftly the recommendations within the report, and I think we and everyone else would look forward to that being the case. The other item that I wanted to touch upon then, and this is one that is causing significant concern again at the minute, is in relation to the neurology inquiry. I think we have already indicated that we would like to get a written briefing from the inquiry team, and that we will schedule a briefing from Brett Lockhart's the public inquiry team in order to ascertain where things are at with that process. But also there have been further developments this week in terms of the Michael Watt and text messages that have been received by family members of concern, and I have asked that those be passed on to the public inquiry team so they can be considered by that team. And also we have the erasure of Michael Watt from the medical register and the impact that has on accountability. So I think we actually need to look at some of the other strands of the neurology inquiry that are ongoing. We have the RQAA strand ongoing into the deceased patients, and also I think we need to hear from the department, potentially the Permanent Secretary, in terms of what the department are doing at this point in time, because this cannot, given the stresses that have been placed on victims and survivors of this, I don't think this can be allowed to just drift along. So I think there's a bit of an urgency with it. So I'm going to just take, I see a couple of members indicating there, the order I have the hands in on screen is Carol, Paula and Pam. I'm not sure if Pam's is up from the previous one, but I'll go to Carol, then Paula, and then I'll check with Pam. Carol?
Okay. So thank you, Chair. I met, as I said in the statement last week, I met with the girl known as Jane in the Spotlight programme, and she gave consent for those texts to be sent to the Minister and indeed via the Chair and the Committee Clerk to go to the inquiry team. I know other members will be equally horrified, but what we need to ascertain is, first of all, given what Michael Watt has done and given the impact on the GMC investigation and indeed their statement, which for me was quite strong, if we could write to the Minister or ask the Minister, does he intend to come to the Assembly even just to give assurances? Because the Brett Lockhart inquiry is about, in my opinion, it's about governance and systems. We need to find out, we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. So basically, I would ask that we write to the Minister asking, will he make an oral statement regarding this?
Yeah, members are content with that proposal, and that we asked the clerk to look at a possible meeting in November to bring in those further strands. So we have the inquiry, RQAA, GMC, and potentially department on those complicated strands, given the very complex nature of this recall. Members content with that? Thank you. The other one then that I wanted to touch upon.
Other members wanting to come in on that?
Oh, sorry, yes, I had Paula. Sorry, apologies. I had Paula and I potentially need to check with Pam. My apologies. Go ahead, Paula, please.
No problem. Chair, you actually moved on from the subject before I got to it, and that was in relation to the report came out this week into the mother and baby homes. I just want to welcome it and thank the panel. I think from first glance at the report, I think the decision is correct. The recommendations are what are in line with what the mother and babies and their adult children are looking for. I do have concerns that when we see these reports launched that things can drift a bit, so I think that if we could put a request in, I'm not sure whether TEO or whether the health department are actually taking the lead in looking at the recommendations, but I think that we should schedule in quickly a departmental response and in terms of how they're going to take forward the recommendations, because as the survivors have said this week, you know, the redress scheme should come forward as a matter of urgency because a lot of them are very elderly, very similar to historical institutional abuse survivors and victims. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Are members content with that proposal? Yeah. And Pam, I wanted to check there if your hand was up from before, if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I also want to back Paula's proposal there in terms of the mother and baby report. I think that is critical that happens. And yes, in terms of the neurology, I know the Clark and his team have been working on bringing maybe all those different bodies in on the same day for committee, so we can look at this as a whole issue. So I would welcome that. I think that's really important. I think it's incredibly difficult for patients of Doctor, what has happened now this week. I think things just seem to be getting worse and worse for them, and they don't see any end in sight in terms of positive outcomes or justice in terms of these matters. So I think it's really important that we do give that good concentration and devote maybe an entire meeting to this particular case.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, members, thank you. Jonathan, go ahead.
Just briefly, Chair, firstly, can I wish Cara, our committee colleague, well, very brave to tell your story as you did, and I wish you every success in your recovery and again, your bravery in telling your story, so best wishes. Chair, just in relation to the Michael Watt inquiry, you had mentioned a written briefing. Would it be possible, or in keeping, that we actually have an oral briefing from the inquiry team before the committee? Because I think only then can we start to tease out exactly where we are with it.
Yeah, no, that was we actually made a double call in relation to that. We asked for a written briefing in advance, and then we would be scheduling an oral briefing, but we wanted to have the written briefing as well to inform the oral briefing. So there's two parts. There was two parts to that, and I did mention that there earlier this morning as well. So yes, that's what is planned, and actually we're going to now broaden that out to include some of the other strands in an oral briefing as well. Thank you. I will. The one thing I mentioned before I come to my final item is that I attended yesterday a part of the NACON conference. I done one of the breakout sessions as chair of the committee alongside the Patient Client Council, and the theme of the meeting was how we can improve engagement with sectors in terms of health and in terms of improving how we do health and social care delivery. I have to say it was an excellent session, really well facilitated by NACON in the first instance, which has been my experience of everything that they do is very well put together. The Patient Client Council also contributed very significantly to that, and they have contributed significantly to some of our engagements here, and some of our very successful engagement, I have to say. So Johnny Turnbull from the Patient Client Council attended that with me, and we did that jointly. I suppose the key message for me, and we will be getting maybe a more detailed report back from it in due course, but the key message for me was one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's something that we should bear in mind as a committee as well, that you need to figure out how an individual or a group of individuals or a sector could engage most effectively with you on a case-by-case basis. A sort of a formulaic approach can actually be counterproductive. So that was one of the key messages. The other key message was that you need to provide people who are engaging with the resources to engage on a fair basis, and then you need to act on what it is you're hearing, and you need to see. And I think that's one of the key frustrations now, is that we need to see, for example, one of the members of Dunmorry Manor families was there, Julianne McNally, and she had said that had the Cherry Tree been reported on, you wouldn't have had Dunmorry. And if Dunmorry is not acted upon, we will see other situations like that. And I think that's a well-made point. The other person who was at the meeting, and I thought it was great to see her at the meeting, given all of the pressures we've discussed in neurology, was Danielle O'Neill, and she outlined some of the difficulties they have had in relation to engagements with statutory agencies, and just communication at times can be even poor. So I think, Jeanette Bradall was there as well, from giving her insight. But I want to thank all the panel members. It was a really good session, and I think it was one that the committee will benefit from in due course as we apply the learning that came from that. So thank you for that, members. And then the final issue I wanted to go to in terms of Chair's business was in relation to Cara Hunter and Cara's sharing of some of the very difficult health situation she has had over the past time, and also my own admiration, I have to say, for her courage in telling that story, but also in the support that it will provide, I believe, to others in relation to people who maybe are feeling similar symptoms but haven't recognised. So I'd like to take Cara in just to say a few words on that. I am aware from Cara's work on this issue that it is Pituitary Awareness Month, but I'll ask Cara maybe to clarify that a little. But I want to thank Cara for what she's done. I want to extend her my best wishes and the committee's best wishes. And Cara, do you want to say anything on that in committee?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair, and to just thank yourself for your support. We spoke this morning, and to also other members on the committee for their kind messages. Yes, it is. It's Pituitary Awareness Month. And certainly I think it's important to take any opportunity to raise health conditions, being a health committee member. So essentially, I would encourage any woman out there who have experienced pressure in their head, headaches, any kind of sight changes or changes to their menstrual cycle, to just be brave and go and speak with their GP. The condition I have, prolactinoma, if left untreated, it can lead to difficulties with sight and difficulties with fertility. So it's just really important that women, tune in, and if they recognise any kind of changes, to come forward and to speak to their GP. And thankfully, it's been very positive coming forward. Initially, I was rather scared, but it shows that there's a lot of people in Northern Ireland living with this condition, according to my emails. So it's been a good way to connect with people, and it's been a lot less isolating. So just to extend my thanks to all political parties that have been in touch, and I really appreciate the kind messages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cara. Okay, members, thank you. That concludes Chair's business. I will move on then to the draft minutes, and I refer members to the minutes at tab 3.1. Are members content with those minutes? Yep. Yeah, thank you, members. And there are no matters arising from the minutes today. So we're moving then, members, to our first substantive briefing, and this morning this is a briefing from the bill sponsor of the Severe Fetal Impairment Abortion Amendment Bill. I refer members to the correspondence from the bill sponsor in response to evidence considered by the committee at tab 5.1 of the pack. A copy of the bill and the explanatory financial memorandum can be found at tabs 5.2 to 5.3 of your pack. May I also draw members' attention to the further submission from the Human Rights Commission, which is at tab 15.11, and ask if members are content to note that submission. Yeah, members content, thank you. I can advise members that the bill sponsor is here today, accompanied by a representative from Don't Screen Us Out, to further discuss the bill and with the committee. So I'd like to welcome now in person, first of all, Mr Christopher Stalford, MLA and sponsor of the bill, and Lynn Murray, who is a director. I think we have Lynn on screen. I'm just going to check with clerk. Do we have Lynn? Yes, I see Lynn here in the spotlight. So we're joined by Lynn Murray, who is a director of Don't Screen Us Out. And I will just check then, Lynn, are you able to hear us okay?
I can hear you, okay?
Yeah. We are hearing you clearly there, Lynn, but we're not seeing you, so I'm just wondering if there's a camera issue at your side that you can... It won't...
No?
Yeah. So we are hearing you, Lynn. We're not seeing you, but we can operate. We can work with that, okay? If you don't manage to get a camera going, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so listen, I will then invite Christopher to go ahead and brief the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Before I answer whatever questions you and the committee members may have, I thought that it would be worthwhile to set out some of my views on the bill and respond to some of the issues that were raised in the oral evidence. This is obviously the first opportunity that I have had to speak on the Severe Fetal Impairment Abortion Amendment Bill since taking over sponsorship on behalf of my party colleague and the now First Minister, Mr Paul Givan. I think it's important that I commend Paul for his work on the bill thus far, and to thank Don't Screen Us Out, and in particular Heidi Crowder, for the work in fighting against disability discrimination and their work on this bill to date. I'm grateful that Lynn Murray, who we'd heard from already, is also here to assist in answering your questions. I think it's only right that we start by reminding members of the words of Heidi and her brave intervention in May last year, calling on the Assembly to make it clear that it rejected the regulations that Westminster has sought to impose upon us, regulations that allow for abortion on the basis of non-fetal disabilities up to birth. The law has been described by Heidi as making her feel worthless. It is worth noting that this Assembly has been consistent in its support for equality and creating a society that's free from disability discrimination. It was a source of profound joy to Heidi and her fellow campaigners when on the 2nd of June 2020, the Northern Ireland Assembly passed 2 motions on this issue, and through those 2 votes, it was clear that 75 MLAs opposed abortion on the basis of non-fetal disabilities like Down syndrome. We've heard talk in other contexts about indicative votes. It's my sincere hope and belief that that is an indicative vote of where the Assembly stands on this issue. Over a year later, what has changed? I hope that this committee agrees that it's plainly unfair to provide an unborn, viable baby no protection in law because it has a non-fatal disability, while a viable baby of exactly the same age is protected because it does not have a disability. And that's what's at the heart of this bill, a recognition that that situation is wrong. The bill is very simple and modest in its scope and ambition, does not engage with any other aspect of the law. It simply reinforces that there is no place for such a situation to exist in Northern Ireland in 2021. As the law currently stands, under Regulation 7 of the 2020 abortion regulations, access to abortion on the grounds of disability would be available in 2 circumstances. Firstly, and I quote, "The death of the fetus is likely before, during or shortly after birth." Or secondly, and again I quote from the regulations, "If the child were born, it would suffer from such physical or mental impairment as to be seriously disabled." Under this bill, there would be no grounds for an abortion on the basis of the second category, where the baby has a non-fatal disability. That's it. This is a single clause bill, and it's a very simple measure to address this issue. Regulation 7(1)(b) perpetuates stereotypes that exist within our society concerning people with non-fatal disabilities such as Down syndrome, namely that they're expendable, they contribute less, their life has less value than people who are not disabled. The message that these regulations send out is clear, as Heidi has so eloquently voiced, that the lives of people of disabilities are less valuable and less worthy of protection than the lives of people without a disability. Paul Givan has described Regulation 7(1)(b) as years out of date and a regressive backward step in the campaign against discrimination and equity for people with disabilities. I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. It is my opinion that to have this type of law on the statute books in the 21st century is completely abhorrent and not representative of the society that I, and I believe the vast majority of people, want to live in. So that's why I agreed to take over as sponsor of this bill when Paul became the First Minister. This law is discriminatory, discounting the last 30 years of campaigning and advocacy for laws which aim to foster fairness, ensuring that those with disability are treated as equals. Laws like the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995, protecting the rights of a person with disabilities, and the Northern Ireland Act 1998, which places a statutory duty on public bodies to have due regard to the need to promote equality of opportunity for people with a disability, which was further amended in 2006 by by the Disability Discrimination Northern Ireland Order to include a requirement that public authorities promote positive attitudes towards disabled people. In 2009, the UK ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. These laws reflect the fact that every person is of worth and of value, that a person's worth is not subjective or dependent upon their capacity to do certain things or to contribute to society in a particular way, and it should not be altered by the diagnosis of a disability. Every life has a value, and that is the message that this Assembly, I believe, should be promoting. This bill stands in that legislative tradition and is another strong fairness and equality message. I'd like to remind the committee that in their 2017 report on Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the United Nations Committee on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities stated that they had, and I quote, concerns about perceptions in society that stigmatise persons with disabilities and about the termination of pregnancy at any stage on the basis of fetal impairment. The United Nations Committee recommended that Great Britain amended its abortion laws accordingly. In evidence already given to this committee, Mr Chairman, you have heard some of the stories of parents in other parts of the United Kingdom being pressurised into making a decision about abortion when a diagnosis of a disability has been made. Laws shape the culture of the society that we live in. Do we wish to live in a culture that places such pressure on parents? The press have reported on the story of Emma Miller, a woman who faced a situation where she was asked by her doctors about termination at 38 weeks. She said the doctors made it really clear that if I changed my mind on the morning of the induction to let them know because it wasn't too late. Emma went on to add, I was told that until my baby had started travelling down the birth canal, I could still terminate. I ask, is this the type of culture that we want to see legislated for? I want to turn to some evidence that has been presented to this committee in oral sessions and to deal with some of the issues and the concerns that have been raised. In particular, I would like to address some of the issues raised by the Royal College of Gynaecologists and Obstetricians. In both their written and oral evidence submissions to the committee, they indicated that they felt that this bill was irrelevant, as these abortions are not happening in Northern Ireland at the present time. I would argue that they have presented this evidence in a disingenuous way. Abortion law is changing in Northern Ireland, and we all know that. The discriminatory acts that will be outlawed by this bill will become a reality if they are not outlawed in legislation. The Secretary of State, in his letter dated the 22nd of July 2021, said, I am also directing the Department of Health and the Regional Health and Social Care Board. The direction includes a requirement to commission, provide and fund abortion services and to secure the availability and affordability of safe and modern contraception so that they are all available in all of the circumstances in which abortions are lawful. In all of the circumstances. This includes access to services, and these are his words, this includes access to services in cases of fatal fetal abnormality and severe fetal impairment in line with the Abortion Northern Ireland No. 2 Regulations 2020 in any service commissioned. The Secretary of State's position therefore could not be more clear. The law in Northern Ireland will mirror that which is in force in England and Wales. Abortions for non-fatal disabilities will become the reality. If this bill is not passed by the Assembly, there is a potential to create the concerning situation that does exist in Great Britain, which I've already talked about this morning. Parents will be questioned by doctors as to why they've made the decision not to abort their child if they receive a diagnosis of non-fatal disability, such as Down syndrome, or they may indeed be pressured into changing their minds. The RCOG also commented to the committee in oral and written submissions that the bill, if passed by the Assembly, would fetter the decision-making processes of doctors in Northern Ireland. In many areas of life, we as legislators put limits on actions because we believe in a safe and fair society. It's within our power and our competence to legislate on this matter. And so, we should do so in whatever way that we feel is in the best interests of our citizens and in shaping the type of society that we want to live in. As already noted, the Secretary of State has been clear. Our law will mirror that of the rest of the United Kingdom. The recent High Court decision in London in the case taken by Heidi Crowder underscores what that means. The law as it stands in Great Britain allows for disability discrimination by permitting late-term abortions. The Heidi Crowder case, which I'm pleased to say is being appealed and I suspect will ultimately be heard in front of the Supreme Court, highlights that legislation is needed to ensure fairness for people with disability. This legislation provides that fairness. People in Northern Ireland do not agree with the regulations made at Westminster by the Secretary of State. That means it's incumbent upon us, as the representatives of the people of Northern Ireland, to reflect the law that the people we represent want to see enacted. It's also important to note that not all members of the medical profession speak with one voice. The evidence of the Royal College must be read in that context. It is written as if all doctors agree, and they do not. Wide variety of views. While what the RCOG have done in their submission is concentrate on the extremely small number of difficult cases and ignore the vast majority of cases that are clear-cut where accurate assessments can be made. It is clearly wrong to concentrate on the small number of difficult cases and use that as an argument that we should not afford protection to those who need it and deserve it. While doctors may be in disagreement, I do think that all members of the medical profession would agree with me on this as a key point. What is needed is better care for mother and baby. The outworking of this bill will ultimately result in that better care environment, something that the RCOG wants to see, as well as many others in our community. I agree with the views of the RCOG when they say that antenatal care is not good enough in Northern Ireland. But rather than liberalise the law or propagate unfairness, what is required is a raising of standards. To simply say that the standards of care are not good enough to cope with the bill, so the legislation should not be passed, is completely the wrong way to look at the legislation. What is needed is proper care and respect for the needs of babies with disabilities and their parents. This bill will raise those standards, and our health service could lead the way in ensuring proper health care for everyone. The view of the Royal College that the care system cannot cope with the provisions of this bill simply further stigmatises people with disabilities and is tantamount to an admission that the care of those people with disabilities is so difficult that doctors would rather not provide that care rather than facing up to challenging healthcare situations. This view, I would suggest, sir, suggests to people with disabilities that their life brings such complexity to the medical profession that some in the profession would find it more convenient that they were never born. It's for this reason that I would suggest that some of the evidence that has been presented by the RCOG and others has been distressing and upsetting for those with disabilities to read and listen to. Many people have felt devalued and demeaned. They are simply a problem that should be exported to England rather than Northern Ireland setting up their own healthcare practice that gives them the fairness of treatment that they deserve. As Mr Justice Horner observed in his 2014 judgment on the judicial review taken by the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, there is an illogicality in calling for no discrimination against those children who are born from disabilities, such as Down syndrome or spina bifida, on the basis that they should be entitled to enjoy a full life, but then permitting selective abortion so as to prevent those children with such disabilities from ever being born in the first instance. Excuse me. In this regard, I would like to deal with something directly with the committee. It has certainly not gone unnoticed that the tone of the proceedings of this committee has taken a different attitude and approach when hearing from representative bodies of doctors as compared to the way in which groups representing those with disabilities have been treated. This committee turned out in full to question the Royal College. There was extensive interaction from committee members with the medical profession. It is notable and concerning that, in contrast, there was limited interaction with those representing people with disabilities when they appeared before this committee. This bill is at its core an attempt to rectify an issue of disability discrimination. It has been reported to me that people with disabilities who believe passionately in this cause have felt distress and discrimination in the way that they have been treated. It is important that we hear from those who feel that they haven't been heard, people who are too often voiceless and invisible in our community. Heidi Crowther, who has bravely taken legal action on this issue in the High Court in London, said, "I want them to see the real me. I don't want to be treated differently because of my extra chromosome." Hannah Wilson, a young woman from Northern Ireland, has said about the current status of the law, I felt very sad when this was explained to me. It feels so wrong. It touches my heart. The law should not treat some people differently from others. I would suggest that the committee may wish to consider, given the distress that some people associated with these groups have felt, whether it would be appropriate to invite some groups and affected individuals back to the committee in order to allow their voice to be heard and given equal respect as those afforded to others. Experts may have their place, but as Harold Macmillan once observed, we have not overthrown the divine right of kings to fall down for the divine right of experts. This issue needs to be addressed. We cannot allow the law to treat a pre-born baby with a disability in a way that is different to a baby that faces no disability after birth. The unfairness is clear. What is needed is better care within the system for both child and parents to ensure every child, every family has the same opportunity in birth and life. This bill gives us, as public representatives, a chance to raise healthcare standards, while at the same time to say to people with disabilities, you matter, you're valued, your voice is worth hearing, and this Assembly will not allow you to be screamed out of existence. I want to finish, Mr. Chairman, and I'm grateful for you for giving me the time in front of the committee. I want to finish with a quote from William Wilberforce. Having heard all of this, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know. And I'm now happy to hand over to Lynn from Don't Screen Us Out.
Thank you. And OK, we'll go across then to Lynn. Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak here today on behalf of the Don't Screen Us Out campaign. As we've discussed before, almost 90% of babies who are found prenatally to have Down syndrome are aborted in Great Britain, where there is this clause relating to disability in the abortion law. The high numbers are hardly surprising when the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists themselves report that women tell them they are having their decisions challenged and being pressured into changing their minds about decisions they've made around screening and abortion. Thankfully, the wider culture is changing, and the presence of people with Down syndrome on platforms such as the BBC, 20-year-old George Webster was recently invited as a guest presenter on the CBeebies show, is big news, shared widely and enthusiastically in the media and by the public. A law promoting abortion for disability is outdated and an unhelpful barrier to creating equality for all. And I'm sure we would all agree that legislation shouldn't perpetuate negative stereotypes, with every other piece of legislation reflecting the standard that we are all equal. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability requires legislation to foster good relations between disabled people and non-disabled advancing equality of opportunity. Unfortunately, the law around fetal impairment, as it stands, requires quite the opposite. It requires perpetuation of a negative disability stereotype, a negative life with disability, to create the illusion that there's a choice when an individual finds that their baby has a disability. And in response to the court ruling on the Crowther case, academic Katrina Sklor from University College London on stigma research recently referred to the extra challenges that families living with disability might face. But what she says, to my mind though, the solution cannot be to offer exceptions to legal provisions on abortion in cases such as Down syndrome, but to improve services and provision for children with disability and their families, to support parents and siblings, and to challenge widely held beliefs that having a child with Down syndrome is nothing but a heavy burden for those unfortunate enough to be the parent or sibling of someone with Down syndrome. Women deserve better, and people with Down syndrome deserve better. One small point, I think it's an important point I'd like to make with regard to the evidence session on 17th of June, where two members of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists spoke. At that time, someone in the Health Committee said that there was a misconception or inaccuracy in claiming that the majority of diagnoses of Down syndrome end up in a termination, and that they understood that that wasn't the case. I personally feel quite concerned that, having presented these statistics before, that there's any doubt as to their accuracy. And there is accessible data that I can happily share from the Public Health England National Congenital Anomaly and Rare Disease Registration Service report for 2018, showing estimates of birth prevalence of congenital anomalies in England, and Table 10 specifically refers to Down syndrome diagnoses. In that report, there were 877 antenatal diagnoses made for Down syndrome. An estimated 747 of those ended in termination, according to the report. I'm happy to share that data, as I say, because I think it's important going forward that we agree on the basis of the discussions that we're having, that we're all on the same page as regards the outcomes here. In light of all that we've presented to you up to now, we ask you to consider that the clause around disability abortion is not helping minority groups, including pregnant women and those with disability. It appears to chiefly serve to perpetuate a view that disability equals suffering and create extra anxiety for women. And we support the Severe Fetal Impairment Abortion Amendment Bill, sponsored by Christopher, and hope that, in the spirit of equality, the Health Committee will too. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Christopher and Lynn, and we will go then to members' questions in relation to that. Just before I come to my question, I have to say I don't recognise that there was a different approach taken, and I would disagree with that. I think we facilitated everyone who wanted to contribute to this and listened respectfully to everyone, and I think that approach was taken across the committee.
I'm happy to address that if you wish, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm going to move on to my own questions. I disagree with you, Christopher, and I believe that the committee engaged with everyone on a fair and an equal basis. My question, first of all, is, having heard the evidence and having followed the committee's proceedings, are there any amendments being considered?
I have tabled one technical amendment which relates to the commencement proceedings. If you look at clause 2.2, it states this Act comes into force on the day which this Act receives royal assent. But there's some issue around on the day. If it receives it at midday, does that mean, so it's purely a technical amendment, and I have no intention of tabling any other amendments. I haven't seen any evidence of further amendments being tabled either.
Okay, and can you just, sorry, I just don't fully understand when you say the technical amendment, what would the likely impact be if not amended?
For Bill Clark will be able to give you the full details on this, but basically for a brief period of time, the law, there would be confusion on, for a 24-hour period about when the law applies. So it's a purely technical amendment. I know that Bill Clark is in with you soon after me, so she'd be able to give you chapter and verse on that, but I was advised on the need to do that just to make sure that the wording was more precise in the bill.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is then that there was evidence presented to the committee that a limited time window does not give families, women and families, time to fully consider, and that it would bring additional pressures. What's your thoughts on that issue, Christopher?
The purpose of my bill, which amends the 2020 regulations, is to ensure that babies with disabilities are afforded the same care and protection as all other babies, regardless of gestation. Terminating a pregnancy on the basis that the baby would have a disability when born, where the disability is not likely to result in the death of the baby either before or shortly after birth, communicates a judgment about the value and worth of that person. So the screening results should be given, in my view, in a highly supportive environment with accurate information. Down Syndrome Association conducted 2 surveys, one in 2009 and repeated in 2014, to identify the antenatal and neonatal experience of parents of a child with Down syndrome. Both surveys showed that women did not recall being provided with enough information about Downs during their pregnancy. So I think it's important. The purpose of this bill, while it's clearly about equity and fairness, is also about raising the standards of care provided in Northern Ireland. And one of the way in which standards of care can be provided is in terms of improving screening services. Now, I don't know, Lynn, if you wish to speak to that question as well.
Yeah, we would very much agree with that. We are, trying to push our health services around providing care pathways for women, and sometimes to sort of baffled looks because there's no understanding of what that might mean. But obviously, when a woman's given news about Down syndrome, she maybe has in her mind a stereotype or whatever around what Down syndrome is, and there needs to be more lived experience presented to women. And ideally screening would have led to some sort of improved medical outcomes as well, and sadly that hasn't been the case, possibly because of the high levels of abortion. We tend to find there's not much research done around Down syndrome, so it hasn't improved outcomes for women in pregnancy, and it hasn't improved outcomes for people with Down syndrome. We would like to see that improved, and as I say, we would also like to see a care pathway established, as 1 or 2 hospitals in England have tried to do at the moment in a very limited way, but we would really like to expand that and to provide much better support for women, because I think there's a general consensus, don't think anyone disagrees with that there's not enough care and support around for women who find themselves in an unexpected situation.
With your permission, Chair, could I go back to the question in relation to amendments?
Yes.
As you know, I think this is an important point for people to note. As you know, this is a 1-clause bill, and it's extremely focused on one issue. And having been in the Speaker's office for a while and sort of familiarised myself with some of the criteria for amendments, I would be of the view that, and again, all these things rest entirely in the hands of Mr. Speaker, but I would be of the view that the scope for amending this bill is much, much more constrained than the scope for amending other bills of a much bigger size. I think it's important that members understand that this is a very singularly focused piece of legislation aimed at addressing one specific issue. And I hope that does address members' concerns, and I've already stated it's not my intention to bring further amendments to this bill beyond the technical one that I detailed for the committee. But I think that's important in the context of the legislative process, that people understand that. I personally, and this is my own personal, and we're all legislators here, and it is my own personal view that the scope for amending this bill is very, very narrow, and I think that's important just for people to consider that. I know you have the Bill Clerk in with you after me, and she can give further advice on that, but I think amendment is important, just that people understand that.
Okay, thank you both. And then I'll draw your attention then to the letter the committee received from the Human Rights Commission, and I'll quote from that letter in one of its concluding paragraphs. It says, and I'll quote directly, "The effect of the bill in Northern Ireland, if passed, will be to compel women in those circumstances to travel to Great Britain. Women in Northern Ireland will be disadvantaged." What's your opinion of that?
I disagree with the Human Rights Commission. I think that the effect of this bill will be about raising standards in terms of the care provided to women. It must be about that. It must be dual. It must be about sending out a message that we as a society value people with disability and don't believe that they are in any way less worthy of existence than the rest of us. But also, accompanying that, it must be about raising the standard of care provided in the health service for people who find themselves in that situation, dealing with that very difficult situation. Lynn, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think this is what, Heidi Crowther's case, all the sort of publicity and awareness around that is about. It's about saying to women, having a child with a disability is not what you might think it is. It's a good life, and evidence shows us that, and I can verify that for myself. But I think that there's improvements that definitely can be made, which are being thwarted by, as I say, high rates of abortion, no specialised services for people with Down syndrome, etc. And I think, we live in an age where we can improve outcomes medically, etc. And I think what we want to do is try to change the legislation to say that all lives are equal, which is what we would say in every other piece of legislation. I think the difficulty here is that it is, enshrined in abortion law, but that we will support women, and that actually when they look round, and as I say, I'm glad, and I've mentioned people here before, I'm glad to see that we're seeing role models in the media now to show women that what you saw in that leaflet, or what might have been, said to you by someone who has no experience of Down syndrome, that actually your life it could be good, and in fact your child might be famous, or and do exceptionally well. So I think that's this idea that it's always about abortion's the answer to disability is to my mind out of step with the people we want to believe ourselves to be today.
Mr. Chairman, just in addition to that, again I bring you back to the indicative votes that were held in the Assembly on this issue. 75 out of 90 Assembly members on that occasion voted in compliance, or in conjunction, in accordance rather with the principles of the bill that I am bringing to this House. So if 75 out of 90 members put their hand to a provision that says we will not abort children on the basis of non-fatal fetal abnormality, my bill gives effect to the will of the Assembly in this regard.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to members' questions. I have some indications on the screen, but we may have an issue. I'm just going to check with the clerk. If we do have an issue there, what I'll propose is, well, I'll check with the clerk first. Are members able to hear us at present?
Yeah, sorry, it kicked me out of the...
Yeah. So the indications I have at present are in the order of Pam, Paula and Jerry. Providing I can get Pam okay, I'll go that route. If not, I might take Jerry in. But I'm going to check first of all with Deputy Chair Pam Cameron. Pam, are you able to hear us there okay?
Loud and clear, thank you, Chair.
Go ahead then, Pam, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Christopher, for your attendance at committee this morning, and also wanted to put on record my thanks to the previous bill sponsor, Paul Given, for his work on this, and also to Lynn, who's with us as well this morning. And heartfelt thanks to Heidi Crowther and her team for the incredible fight they're putting up to ensure that discrimination doesn't continue to exist against people like her, and that they are given their place in this world along with the rest of us, which is right and proper. And I wish them all the best with the appeal. In terms of questions, Christopher, there's been an overriding focus in recent years on the rights of women and the importance of bodily autonomy, but little emphasis on the evolving rights of the unborn child. And researchers have recently rolled back on claims that the fetus cannot feel pain at certain stages of gestation. So does the bill seek to partially restore the balance and protect the unborn child who is disabled vis-a-vis those who are not disabled? That's my first question.
Yes, is the short answer. I think this debate is obviously very emotive, and I think it's important that we do deal with these issues in a sensitive way. I understand and fully accept that there are very, very strongly held views on these issues at a sort of general principle level in terms of whether one is pro-life or pro-choice. But at this level, I think actually there is much less division within society. I think that regardless of what particular label one attaches to oneself, I think that the majority of people, whether they would classify themselves as pro-life or pro-choice, recognise that there's something inherently unfair in the campaign's called Don't Screen Us Out. There is something inherently unfair in screening out of existence people who are born or will be born with a disability. And I just think that sends a powerful message as to the sort of society that we wish to become. I mean, I read an article not so long ago about Iceland. Iceland is not free of Down syndrome. They're simply aborting every child that's diagnosed with it. And I just don't think that it's right at a human level, at a societal level, that we should consider one person less worthy of an existence than the other. And I think regardless of at the sort of macro level, people take very strong views on abortion. But I actually think when you drill down into an issue like this, I think there's much more common ground.
Thank you. Pam, have you another question?
I do, Chair. I have a couple more questions here. A very quick one before we go on to the next one. Christopher, I wanted to ask you, isn't it accurate to say that the bill does not seek to prevent someone travelling to another jurisdiction to access abortion?
No, the scope of this bill is very closely defined. It's a single clause bill. It addresses a single issue. And I think that is important for people to note. This is not, this piece of legislation, if passed, is not going to be subject to mission creep, because, as I say, I think the scope for amending a single clause bill is very, very tight anyway. But this is a specific issue around the screening out of people with non-fatal disabilities, and that is the focus. That is the sole objective of this bill, and I think it's important that we remain focused on that as what is at the heart of this bill, and that is it. Simple as, no backdoors, no hidden clauses at a later date. That is it. That's what this bill aims to do.
Thank you. And Pam again.
Yes, Chair, I have two more, if that's okay. Christopher, how do you think concerns raised around clarity and certainty for clinicians can be squared with the content of the bill? So, I mean, can these issues be addressed by a new professional protocol, for example?
Yes, I think that they can, and I also think the position adopted by the Royal College to me seems very strange, because on one hand the argument was being made that the cases that this bill would seek to legislate for are so infinitesimally small as a percentage of abortions that would be carried out as to not merit legislative provision, while at the same time the argument is that if this legislative provision was passed, it would place an undue burden upon the health service. Well, I don't think that you can have it both ways. You can't argue that the legislation is irrelevant because the number of cases is so small, while at the same time arguing that if the number of cases was legislated for, it would place an undue burden upon the health service. And I think that that's, frankly, doublespeak. And I think that we have it within us, as a devolved region of the United Kingdom, to raise the standard in terms of care provided to families who find themselves facing this difficult situation, and to send a powerful message to people with disabilities that we value you, we feel you are equal with us, and we as a society don't believe that people should be screened out. Lynn, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think that's, as I say, the whole, as I've been saying, Heidi has made this public gesture to show that she feels there's discrimination, and I think that's been well received by the media. Lots of people in the media told us they didn't realise that the law extended to birth for people with disabilities. So that was quite a revelation to a lot of people. And I think there was a lot of shock from people and people from very different opinions around, abortion. I think they see it clearly as a discrimination issue. And I think that is very important. And another thing, when the RCOG spoke about abortion, they talked about not just Down syndrome, but when we find there's Down syndrome and there's another, obviously a medical condition that they find before birth, that this means the child will be more seriously impacted. And I think that, again, we have to sort of, that's actually not the case. For example, I know that like Heidi herself was born with heart problems. They thought she had leukemia. It never came to anything. And, you know, she herself has gone on to be someone that's lived a very fulfilled life. So again, we really need to be looking more closely at these sort of things and the understanding of what Down syndrome and possibly another medical condition actually mean in after birth. So that there's that. And we know that parents are told, you know, there's one woman that was told, well, the baby's got Down syndrome. We don't know what that means, but they've also got a heart condition, so they'll be on the more severe end, you know, of the condition, and that's actually what we see in reality is not the case.
Thank you, Lynn. And Pam, could I ask for a brief question and as brief a response as possible? Just I want to get to other members as well, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, finally for me. In GP, research has shown that 69% of pregnant women who receive a positive diagnostic test result for Down syndrome were offered a termination in the same conversation. So is there a need to address concerns around prenatal screening stereotyping disabilities moving forward?
Yes, there is, and I'm glad you raised that issue because I was looking for this reference. In 2017, the UNCRPD committee said in their report on Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the committee is concerned about perceptions in society that stigmatise persons with disabilities and about the termination of pregnancy at any stage on the basis of fetal impairment. The committee recommends that GB amend its abortion law accordingly. So the law that pertains in GB may be the law, but there were things in our history, Mr. Chairman, that were the law which we now recognise were bad things. And that's our job as legislators, is to legislate for that.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going then to Paula Bradshaw. Go ahead, Paula, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Christopher, for coming to committee today. I would start off on a positive note to say that I fully agree that we should be raising the standards of support and care for mothers during the screening process and also for those living with disabilities later in life. So we're very much on the same page about that, but I fail to notice anything in the bill that actually goes any way to addressing those issues. You say that today, for example, that the bill will send out a message. I don't think that that is strong enough to compel the Department of Health or any other partner bodies to actually address those concerns. So that's possibly something that we as a committee need to come back to. But
Can I just, on that?
I'll let Paula finish her question.
Is there a question?
Yeah,
look, I am not going to address the straw man arguments that Christopher has put up, not only in his oral evidence, but in the written briefing that we received today. We can come back to those at a later stage. Any concerns that he has that I feel that are legitimate, I think that they have been addressed in the oral and written evidence that we have received from healthcare professionals, women who are affected, and many others. To say that we have received evidence of pressure or that local clinicians, healthcare professionals, have questioned the decisions of women locally, that is untrue. We have not received any of that, and I think it is an absolute affront to the professionalism and integrity of the healthcare professionals that we as a committee have heard evidence from. I'm not expecting a response. They are my own thoughts, and I'm just putting that on the record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Am I allowed to respond?
Yep, go ahead now, Chris.
If Ms Bradshaw has concern about the failure of the Department of Health or partner bodies to raise the standard of care, I would suggest there are probably few people in a better position in society in Northern Ireland than a member of Stormont's Health Committee to raise those issues.
Thank you. Paula, have you another question, or am I going to go ahead to Jerry? I think you're...
Go ahead, Jerry. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, Jerry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, along with that, Chair, I have a few questions along with that each.
Gary, could you point the mic towards you just?
So, Jerry, in that case, could I ask you to be brief, and could I also ask the panel, in keeping with other sessions that we have done, if one of yourself can deal with the substantive issue, and then if there's additional information from the other members, but I'm trying to avoid repetition. So, Jerry, brief as you can, and brief and succinct for question and answer, please.
Okay. The written paper from, I guess, Paul Given's name. Obviously, you've taken over the bill, and you sort of indicated today, Christopher, about upholding the rights of people with disability and ending the idea that they're less valuable than people with disabilities. Would you accept that the political and societal approach to people with disabilities shapes this discrimination, and then that discrimination has been unfortunately at large prior to the 2019 legislation that you're trying to amend?
Well, I think that society evolves, of course, and things that were acceptable 50, 60 years ago in terms of how people interact with each other and how people treat each other are clearly unacceptable now, just as provisions that were acceptable in 1968 when the Abortion Act was passed. I think society has moved on, particularly in terms of the development of the scientific advancements that we as a society have made. So when that legislation was passed, to be born with a disability was to be, I think society's attitude then was very much that people with disability were a second class of citizen. I don't think that that is the attitude anymore. So I think that societies, the prevailing social mores that existed 50 years ago obviously change over time, and I think that the legislation reflects where I think that the broad majority of people in society are at in relation to our attitude towards disabled people.
Okay, many people would see the way that the state treats people with disabilities in terms of minimal access to benefits, carers treated disgracefully, as evidence of disabled people being treated
absolutely
disgracefully.
Absolutely agree with you.
Concerned that this is the bill focuses on one aspect of will effectively relate to a small number of pregnancies. But we've always got quite a few questions. Do you believe that women, when they receive a diagnosis of a severe disability, a non-fatal diagnosis, that they are coerced or pressured to have a termination?
Well, I have never lived that experience. What I did in my opening address was give you direct quotations from people who have.
Okay. Well, I think many people would dispute the way.
But sorry, Terry, be fair.
That idea.
Through the chair,
Mr. Chairman, what I quoted in my opening address was the lived experience of real people.
Okay. Well, I just note that Pam referred to the 69% of pregnant women who received a positive diagnostic test for Down syndrome were offered termination in the same conversation. It doesn't mention any offer of support for those women to continue the pregnancy, which I don't know if that was offered or not, but I think that would be an interesting comment to look at. Have you engaged with midwives or their various representatives on this bill?
Beyond, I have all of the submissions that were submitted. I took over responsibility for this bill during the summer period. Obviously, I'm happy to meet with any group that wants to meet with me to talk about the provisions of the bill, but I have read, there's quite a lot of them. Obviously, for a one-clause bill, it got a significant amount of public interest. I have read through most of the submissions that were made, but if anyone wishes to meet with me, I'm happy, and that includes members of your committee, Mr. Chairman, or yourself. I'm happy to make myself available to talk through the issues.
Thank you, and I think just from memory, as one of the representatives were I think quite offended by the aims of the bill. It might have been the Royal College, but I stand to be corrected on that. And just two final quick questions. If the law changes in these cases, you're seeking to prevent women accessing terminations. I mean, Pam said the bill doesn't prevent people from travelling, so presumably these women will still be able to access terminations just elsewhere.
Well, I think our job as representatives of the people of Northern Ireland is to legislate for what we think should be the prevailing situation in Northern Ireland. And 75 out of 90 Assembly members in the Assembly put their hand to one or two motions in relation to this issue, indicating that they did not believe that people with disability, non-fatal disabilities, should be screened out in the way in which things pertain in GB, and therefore I am seeking through this legislation to enact the will of the Assembly in that regard.
okay, many people, myself included, would take the view that it's exporting a health situation, which has happened for many, many decades. Just finally, Chair, the situation about Iceland was referenced, and I think that's often quoted in this in general conversations. It's actually inaccurate to say that there's no people with Down syndrome. That's my interpretation of what you said. If that's not directly what you said, then that's my bad. The numbers vary year to year in Iceland for people for people with Down syndrome being born. The WHO reports on cases per 100,000 people, 100,000 live births. So some year there are a handful of people born with Down syndrome, some years they're not. And apart from 1989, 2009, there was people born with Down syndrome in Iceland. So I think that myth needs to be challenged.
If we're talking about percentages per 100,000 births, and there are years where 0 children with Downs have been born, I think that sends a very powerful message.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jerry and Christopher. And then final question from Jonathan Buckley. Jonathan, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hearing you, Jonathan. I'm not seeing you, but we are hearing you.
Apologies, but my Wi-Fi signal hasn't been good, so I've had to disable the camera. Christopher, thank you very much for your presentation. The Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and others rely heavily on the CEDAW report to reject this bill. Would you agree, isn't it the case that only that what is actually contained in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women itself, and not the CEDAW report, that is actually binding legally?
Yes, that's correct. CEDAW has no legal enforceable recognition as far as I understand it. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, because that's an important clarification and certainly informs the debate here. Would you agree that, and I think you alluded to this in some of your opening comments in relation to the scrutiny of the bill, but would you agree that some of the language thrown about describing carrying a child with a fetal anomaly as degrading and inhuman ignores the many positive experiences many of women in Northern Ireland, are experiences of many women in Northern Ireland in these situations?
Yes, I do agree with that. I think some of the language used by people is insensitive. Now, I think that places an obligation on those of us who stand on the other side of that debate to be equally sensitive. And this is, as I said, a very emotive issue. People at a very macro level adopt labels and dig themselves into trenches. But I happen to think that at a micro level, when it comes to the content of this bill, regardless of what label you attach to yourself, I think it's perfectly possible to support this legislation. I think that it's important that all voices in the debate, particularly the voices of those whose lived experience has been raising a child with Downs or raising a child with disability, or disability campaigning groups, have their voices heard. And in that context, I think it's important that the committee perhaps consider hearing from them more fully, because... Sorry, Jonathan, go on. Yes?
I would also be interested to hear Lynn's opinion on that, given her representation with Don't Screen Us Out.
Yes, I'm happy to hand over. Yeah.
Okay, listen, through the chair there. So, Lynn, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I think that what we're saying here is, and I think maybe to address what Joe was saying as well, that the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists themselves are telling us that women are reporting coercion around screening and abortion. And I think, it goes back to also this idea of perpetuating stereotypes. There is a very positive lived experience of people who have given birth to a child with disability, and we're now hearing the voices of people with disability. Heidi and as I say, lots of other people now commenting in the media and completely understanding what this situation is, and it's important. These voices are important. We can't just say, well, we disagree, that this doesn't cause negative stereotypes.
Okay, and finally from me, Chair, this bill, regardless of where people stand on it, it has given the legitimate rise to the conversation surrounding the wholly inadequate services that there is for disabled people in relation to to healthcare. So could I ask, does the bill sponsor believe that the bill should be accompanied by a greater focus on children's palliative end-of-life care, specialised pathways for women who have received a diagnosis of serious fetal impairment and post-pregnancy support? And how can this be achieved?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do believe that it's not enough that the bill should stand in isolation, and I agree with everything that you've said, and that's where I think it's an important part of the role of not only your committee, but also all of us as Assembly members, to hold the Department and the Minister to account in terms of improving the level of service given to people in the situations that have been discussed about today. I think, Mr Chairman, did you say that was the final question?
Yes.
Well, in that case, I'm happy to make the offer to the committee that I make myself available to any member that wants to come and speak to me about the content of the bill at any time. And again, Mr Carroll, you mentioned groups. If any group has been in touch with you that hasn't been in touch with me, if you put them in contact with me, I'm happy to speak to them.
Okay, thank you, members, and I want to thank Lynn on screen and for appearing at committee again, and to Christopher for coming along today and taking members' questions. I thank you both, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we were scheduled to take the bill clerk in relation to that, but the following item 7 is a briefing from the sponsor of the bill on the safe access zones. And given that we have run over, if with your indulgence permission, I'd propose that we take that briefing now, and then we return to the item from the bill clerk, just to give the sponsor of that bill the opportunity to present in full. Were members content we move to item 7? Yeah. Thank you. So item 7 then is Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Bill, and we are receiving a briefing today from the sponsor on the principles of this bill. Members will be aware that the Private Members Bill was introduced on the 13th of September and was referred to this committee. The bill sponsor, Ms Claire Bailey, is here today to brief the committee on the principles of the bill ahead of the second stage. I refer members to the bill and the explanatory financial memorandum at tab 7.1 and 7.2 of the pack. So I would now like to welcome to our committee today Ms Claire Bailey, who is MLA and the sponsor of this bill. You're very welcome, Claire, to our meeting. And do you want to make some opening remarks by way of a briefing, and then we'll take any questions that members may have?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the invite to speak with you today about the bill. I greatly appreciate being here and having the opportunity. I suppose my opening remarks, I'm hoping that maybe all the members have seen the bill. It has been introduced and scheduled then for second stage debate on Tuesday the 12th. I suppose the background to this bill was I spent a number of years being a client escort with the Mary Stopes Clinic when it was open in Belfast City Centre, and my experiences through that time with the protesters and with the clients, with staff, with other building users, with the housing executive and other surrounding property staff, people and general public as well, just convinced me that what is happening was not protest, was certainly not protest as I understood it, and I seen the need for this to be addressed. So that's the personal context of why I wanted to bring this bill. I started working on this bill back in 2016. Obviously, we had the 3 years with no executive, and I was able then to pick it up in 2020. And delighted now that it is drafted and introduced. I know that the committee has taken evidence and heard from clinicians on this issue, but I'm happy to give an overview of the bill itself, but also of the rationale behind it, if the committee want, or I can I know you're running behind, so if you want me just to stick to maybe focusing on the content of the bill, I'd be more than happy just to do that, and then take questions after.
Yep, that's
okay.
Fine there, yep.
Great. Well, I suppose I'd give you the context of the policy content in the bill. If you could just bear with me to find my paper again, I'm all over the place. So there's 6 main policy objectives contained within the bill, and if enacted, then it would, 1, ensure that buildings that house organisations offering sexual and reproductive health services have safe access appropriate to their specific location and environment. Currently, terminations may be carried out in general practitioners' premises, clinics provided by Health and Social Care Trust, Health and Social Care Trust hospitals operating under the overall Northern Ireland HSC framework, and women's homes where second stage of early medical termination may be carried out. The regulations also provide a power for the Northern Ireland Health Minister to be able to approve further places where medical abortion can be performed, with the power being able to be exercised at any point in time. So there's no provision for protesters included in the bill. The bill will ensure that women and others visiting or working the premises with legitimate reason, and anybody accompanying them, are not approached unsolicited within the zone. The bill seeks to prevent activities designed to cause distress or to deter a woman from approaching a building, such as filming, recording, unsolicited counselling, street counselling, pamphlet distribution, and the bill does list the types of behaviours as well. The other policy objective would be to place an obligation on the appropriate department officials to establish what a safe access zone for that specific premise would look like within 1 month. I think it was 8 weeks we extended it to, for the service provider. So to set that deadline so it can't go on for an indeterminate length of time. And I think that's the main content within the bill, really. And I'm more than happy to take questions if members have any.
Okay, thank you, Claire. And we have, as a result of the SFIA bill, which we addressed in the previous session, we have heard around huge concerns around this issue, including that other people who are accessing those facilities for other health services are being impacted by this, and also that people who are struggling with difficult pregnancies and trying to bring those pregnancies are also accessing and are also being caught up in this. So how do you think your bill would help to protect users of health services and particularly vulnerable women?
Well, in my experience, I have had some very disturbing and distressing experiences. For example, I have been with one young woman who was so distressed at the approach from these protesters and their behaviours. They were threatening to film clients leaving clinics, uploaded onto social media, saying that they were from the BBC and that this would be reported on tonight's news, or that it was going to be reported to the PSNI. And one young woman who ran into oncoming traffic, 4 lanes of oncoming traffic, for example, to try and get away. We also know that the situation has changed with the change in the legislation, and we are in a very different context than England, for example, where abortions or clients would be accessing specific premises. So what I'm hearing now from professionals and clinicians is that when the protests are happening, say for example at Daisy Hill Hospital in Newry, then the impact of the disruption caused outside with the protesters is causing, say for example, speech and language therapy sessions to be changed or shifted within the building, or to be cancelled altogether because they can't be continued. So, the effect on staff as well, having to come in and out. We're hearing that staff are being recorded, staff are being intimidated, and that they have to go through this continual disruption as well. Going back to my experience with Mary Stopes was in a 9-storey building. They had 1 floor in that building. Other businesses operated in the same premises, such as legal services, recruitment agencies, admin staff and services. And what happened was that any woman of childbearing age would have been approached by the protesters, that they would have been, offered pamphlets, they would have been, there was a whole, I don't want to go into the detail unless you want me to, of what's happening on the streets. But even people next door in the Northern Ireland Housing Executive had to, face this as well, people accessing the Housing Executive as well as staff. And that we know that with the health trusts, with clinics, I know, for example, the Family Planning Centre in College Street in Belfast City Centre, that there are other service users and other businesses and other services in that same building. So the blood transfusion service, for example, is also there, that there's a heavy admin service, and all staff, all clients and all general public are all approached by the protesters.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go to members then, questions, and we have, I have at this time Carol, Paula, Ciara, Pam, Jerry and Jonathan in that order. So I'll go first of all to Carol Ní Killen. Carol, Leanna Ray, Leis and Kesh Lidahol.
Thank you, Chair. For bringing the bill forward. I actually think it's a very good bill. We did hear some presentations from the medical professionals, and some of them were quite harrowing. I've also dealt with constituents who had to run a gauntlet at the protest, but also I've spoken to other colleagues, and I've seen stuff on social media, particularly around Daisy Hill, that one woman who was going in to try and continue her pregnancy had complications, had really graphic images, and this woman had suffered a series of miscarriages with her and her partner. It was very, very distressing. So I welcome the fact that there will be protections for people, but also there's a balance in the bill, and I think you have it in clause 9, and well, it's suppose it's clause 6 really. So in terms of offences in respect of a safe access zone, so would some of the offences cover some of the examples of harassment that I've outlined? And then the other question is, the bill rightly, in my opinion, talks about a balance of people's right to protest as well as people's right to access health and social care. So if you just want to elaborate on those, Claire, and that's my questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carl, and I'm glad that you've picked that up, because it's not my intention at all to try and limit or remove anybody's right to protest. This is really focused on being able to provide safe access to healthcare, and it is about that balance of rights. So I have also engaged with the Human Rights Commission, with the Equality Commission. I've engaged with the Secretary of State, with the Northern Ireland office, with a number of bodies, and I will continue to do so as well. And also then we know that in the CEDAW recommendations, when they did the full UK inquiry, that safe access was one of their recommendations, but that was not brought forward by the Northern Ireland office, so that we know that it is not my intent to try and overstretch or limit anybody's right to protest or their freedom of assembly. And I have been very, very clear in that one as well, but under the Human Rights Act, so I think it's Article 11 is the right to free assembly. So that is caveated, and I'm going to just try and maybe read out to you and the committee what the caveats are. So under Article 11, freedom of assembly and association, everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and to freedom of association with others, including the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his interests. But that's caveated then with restrictions can be placed on the exercise of these rights, other than such as are prescribed by law, and they specifically mention when that is in the interest of public safety, for the prevention of disorder or crime, and for the protection of health. So I'm hoping that the balance has been struck within the bill to protect both those competing rights and not restrict in contravention with the freedoms and rights there. But I think that's addressed your, Carl, I think you had two. I'm hoping that's addressed one. What was the second question?
What was the other one again, Carol?
So it was just around making sure that the staff and users of health and social care are protected. Given some of the harrowing examples that we've heard, that some members of staff had to accompany people to cars and things like that. So I welcome that. But the other thing was in terms of the protests on what would be seen as intimidating behaviour, right? Or criminal behaviour, certain behaviour in a safe access zone. So would you have any examples of that, or is that something that will be brought forward in guidance? I'm not a clerk, I apologise. I'm keeping my camera off as much as I can because, like Jonathan, it keeps coming up that my Wi-Fi isn't stable, so it helps just keeping the camera off.
That's fine. And listen, there's a real difficulty when we start to look at the harassment issue. And through my experience, well, the harassment laws that we currently have mean that someone has to, something has to happen to the same person twice, at least two, on at least 2 occasions in order to constitute harassment. So in my experience, and I'm sure that it's the same now, that people entering the clinic, clients, women trying to access services, normally would be approached by one protester, but when they're leaving would be approached by a different protester, and therefore under harassment legislation that does not constitute harassment because it's 2 different people on 2 separate occasions. When it was happening to us as escorts, then we were getting the response that no, because they're not trying to access you, so therefore they're not trying to harass you, and there was sort of a lot of dispute about what constituted harassment. But having said that, I and all the other clinic escorts at the time, I mean, I had occasions where I was spat on, I was splashed with holy water, I was called a murderer. There was just a whole number of incidences that happened, and in one case when I reported to the police, one protester was arrested, and a whole investigation did happen, but no prosecution did take place in the end either. But yeah, I've been physically assaulted on a number of occasions, and I'm not the only one as well. So this harassment legislation that we have, I don't feel is fit for purpose for what we're dealing with, and that there's a very concerted campaign of intimidation happening on our streets that our legislation currently can't deal with.
Okay, thank you, Claire. And going then to Paula. Go ahead, Paula, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claire, for bringing your bill here today. Very much supported. In the explanatory and financial memorandum, in terms of the policy objectives, you list there the stopping certain activities outside the clinics, and you reference pamphlet distribution. I'm just wondering, in your preparation for the bill, did you also consider banning the displaying of those huge graphic images of fetuses, as we know they cause great trauma to the women entering the clinics, not least those who've suffered miscarriage? So just wondering, is that something you've considered and discounted, or something that you could possibly look at in terms of an amendment to the bill? Thank you.
Thanks for that one. I'd be happy to look at that as an amendment. In my thinking, I was assuming that would be already covered under the provisions, but if you feel that maybe needs to be tightened, that's something I'd be more than happy to look at. More than happy to have a conversation with you on as well, if you want to, Paula. And thank you for that one. Sorry, in my head, I was assuming that would be covered, so I'll certainly look at tightening that up.
Yeah, no, thank you, Claire, because it sort of says etc. And I was just wondering was it rather that, but I think that possibly this should be included because they can be huge and very overbearing. Not least those people going in the clinic, but people even just driving past. So, no, appreciate your positive response, Claire, and look forward to engaging with you around that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And going then to Ciara. Go ahead, Ciara Hunter, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Claire for being here this morning. Claire, I'm mindful within my own constituency, speaking with representatives from the Northern Trust, we've had a number of issues at local clinics, and it's caused severe stress to anybody receiving healthcare. I'm just mindful on this bill, have you had any conversations with trusts about this going forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Cara. Yes, I absolutely have, and I will continue to speak to them. I haven't met with too many of the chief executives at the minute, but I've certainly contacted them. I've written to them recently as well, but I have been in contact with many of the staff, and I think that for the point of this conversation, there's a lot of confidentiality maybe that is required, but those conversations will continue without a doubt, and I think that they're absolutely vital to making sure that we get this right.
Thank you, and I welcome just your point of clarification around, I think we all recognise one's right to assembly, to protest, and right to religious belief, but I think this kind of harm and intimidation is wholly inappropriate, and thank you for coming to committee today.
If I can, Chair, just on that one, I mean, it should be very cognizant as well that this bill is not particularly unique, that these measures have been taken in other states as well. And I know that in the USA, for example, in Canada, in Australia, France, South Africa, they've all implemented buffer zones in some shape or form, and I know that in England, under the public safety protection orders, that this has been implemented, and that there's currently legislation going through Westminster as well to try and embed that further. And then obviously this bill that I've been introducing now, and there's a draft bill in the South as well. So it's not unique, and I know that it has been challenged in England in the High Court. That challenge was lost, and a refusal from the Supreme Court to accept an appeal to that challenge was also upheld as well. So it never made it to the Supreme Court. So there is precedent in other jurisdictions, including England.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, is that you, Cara? Yeah, I think Cara was finished there, so thank you for that. So I'm going to move on then to Pam. Go ahead, Pam, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the bill sponsor, Claire, for your attendance this morning, for your brief and for your time. Just to say from the outset that certainly from a party view, we recognise that those accessing these premises find themselves in incredibly difficult circumstances and may be traumatised by being confronted by visible and local groups of protesters, and obviously staff do inevitably get caught up in all of this as well, and we completely recognise that. Also recognise the fact that often services are operating out of large buildings with different services, with different organisations, different businesses operating out the same building. So I completely recognise that, and it is right and appropriate that nobody is faced with intimidation or harassment in any circumstance. We also recognise that life activity and demonstrations take various forms, some of which are entirely legitimate, but others which may constitute intimidation or harassment. So we do need to strike a balance between addressing specific and evidenced criminal behaviours and tarring all public expressions with the same brush. So in terms of questions, Claire, in clause 6, which stipulates the offences to be created, could I ask why there's no reference to offending behaviour having to be violent or threatening? And I'm thinking in terms of, this threshold is set out in the new Domestic Abuse Act, for example. So that's my first question.
Thanks for that, Pam. And again, it's, like Paula, if you feel that would be maybe worthy of an amendment, I'd be more than happy to have a wee look at that and continue talking to you on that one. But again, it was trying to strike that balance. It was not my intent with this bill to be severely restrictive or to have very heavy enforcement measures. I'm hoping that by the establishment or if this bill is enacted, that the PSNI will be enabled to, firstly let people know if they're in that space that this is not allowed and ask them to move on. I would hope that they would move on, but there is no imprisonment, for example. There's no jail times. I'm not going to that level of enforcement. Again, I chose not to do that, I suppose, because I just don't see the benefit, but if others do, I'm willing to have a look at that again. And violent behaviours, I think that, in my experience, the violent behaviours are very maybe insipid rather than prescriptive. But again, you're making me think about the detail of that, and certainly if it needs to be more explicit within the bill, I'm more than happy to look at that.
That's great, thank you. And that kind of leads me on to my second and third questions, which were, you know, to ask you, do you think that additional duties would be placed on police constables, for example, as a result of the bill, because of associated training? And would that be proportionate, given that there's no provision for custodial sentences in the bill? And then my third one was around the practical concern that creating buffer zones would create new public safety order issues adjacent to health and social care estates.
It is my hope that it won't be too burdensome or put extra pressures on the police. In my experience through Mary Stopes, what ended up happening was that there was a permanent police presence at the doors of the clinic, that for every hour that clinic was open, that there were at least 2 officers present, just to monitor the proceedings and what was going on. If we can enable this act, I would like to hope that that actually enables the police to maybe scale down the calls that they might get, the reports that they might get, how they might have to follow up as well. And by having that safe access zone, then people can protest at a safe distance, and that interference won't happen. So I hope that maybe addresses the resource on policing. The issue of training is probably one that does need to be taken, but we know that there's a lot of gender-based violence currently going on. We're hearing about a lot of domestic violence training with the police officers, with a lot of on-street harassment and attitudes, for example. So with that training ongoing, I would envisage that raising awareness of what this bill is would be there as well. I have met recently with the police, and they are keen to talk to me about the detail in the bill as well, and that meeting is currently being set up, if that gives you any reassurance. And your second question's just gone out of my head again. Sorry, Pam.
Yeah, you're okay. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked altogether. It was around the practical concern that creating buffer zones would create new public safety issues around health and social care estates.
Okay. Well, I think that the current situation is a matter of public safety, and that we're seeing that playing out. What I'm hoping is that by establishing, or if passing this bill, that can be addressed. I think that since the abortion laws have changed, that we're seeing a more widespread disruption on the street with the protests, and I think that it's very unsustainable. And again, I know that abortion can be a very politically contentious issue, so it's not, to me, this is not about affecting that. It's not about, anybody's personal opinion on abortion, but that these protests, when they're happening on such a widespread area, that level of public disorder will continue to escalate, and we need to acknowledge that and find a way to address it. I'm hoping that this bill can do that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Pam. And Jerry then.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Claire. Fully support the bill, and thanks for bringing it. I think it's important. Just to clarify, in terms of the protected zones, organisations apply for them. They're not imposed. They're an application process. That's the way it works under this bill. Yeah. And then obviously just kind of underline the point that people who are anti-choice will still be able to protest, organise, even display distasteful material that sort of most people would find offensive, but it's just limiting where they can do that. That's really the aim of the bill, isn't it? Yeah. That's it. It was limiting where they can do that. It's providing safe access, and I think that's the real key. Women and staff and other service users or other building users just don't have that safe access at the minute, and that's what's absolutely key. So it's not infringing upon civil liberties or any human rights either. It's simply, with the caveats that come with human and civil liberties, making sure that everybody is allowed to go about their business unhindered. Yep, thank you. And then have you a sense of party support? I would hope everybody, the majority of parties are supporting it, but just have you any sense of that? And I think Belfast City Council passed a motion, was it last year maybe, in support of this general principle. Are you aware of any other councils or any other kind of motions passed in sort of public bodies to kind of support this kind of call?
Yeah, I think, now correct me, I'm not 100%, but I think Derry Strabane District Council also passed a motion, and I think that there's one coming to North Down and Ards as well. Maybe Lisburn and Castlereagh, just to sound out. But when they went through those debates that happened at council level, got full cross-party support. To the best of my knowledge, there was no objections whatsoever, because people fully understand that this is about, safe access. It's about harassment and intimidation and keeping people safe on the streets.
So hopefully good news for the bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. And then I have Jonathan, and then I'll be going to Alan. So go ahead, Jonathan, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you, Jonathan. Go ahead, please.
And thank you, Claire, for coming before the committee today. Claire, I suppose my questions focus around the freedoms aspect, and I take on board some of the comments that you've made, that you haven't been prescriptive on this, and therefore there's further opportunity to tease this out. But given that the bill would effectively prohibit or limit potentially freedom of speech and assembly within the curtilage of a certain health and social care premises, for example, is the reference in fundamental freedoms in Clause 9, is that just an afterthought, or are we serious about that aspect?
Sorry, Jonathan, in Clause 9 in the bill?
Yes.
As opposed to Article 11 under the freedom of assembly and association, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So Clause 9 talks about the right to manifest religious belief and the rights to freedom of assembly and expression set out in Article 9, 10 and 11 of the Convention, and particularly the right to protest. So what I'm trying to say, is that essentially an afterthought given what the purpose would be to limit that freedom of assembly and protest?
So again, it goes back, I think that's the same that I've said before, those are caveated freedoms, with rights obviously then comes responsibilities, and the responsibility on every citizen is to, not be limiting other people's freedoms. So that's why when you look at the Article 9, but also Article 11, it's the same again, that the freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs shall be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of public safety, for the protection of public order, health or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. So if they are being infringed, then a democratic society is perfectly within its entitlements to bring a law that balances the rights and the freedoms of all people. So it doesn't remove the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. It does not remove the freedom of assembly and association. It simply allows for those within, for people trying to access a particular premises, that they are not infringed on under those caveats.
Okay, and given there's likely to be a wide difference of opinion in terms of interpretation of how this would have impact, how likely is there that there will be legal challenges to this legislation if enacted by those advocating for civil liberties?
Well, of course, in a democratic society, anybody is free to challenge any legislation, but I'll refer you back again to when this was enacted under the public protection orders in England, that there was a legal challenge, that it did go to court, that the challenge was not successful, and that an appeal was lodged to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court then decided not to allow that challenge, and upheld the original decision. So that's as far as I suppose I can go in a sort of more localised context, and I hope that helps.
Well, do you feel that the number of potential challenges might outweigh the benefits of the proposed bill in your name?
Well, no, because the benefits are allowing people to go about their business and access services, access work without any fear or intimidation or harassment. So I think that is something that we should all be working and doing our utmost to uphold. I don't see any conditions where it would be okay to have anybody in this assembly to think that infringement on someone would be okay. So that's what I'm upholding. And if people feel that they want to challenge that, then that's okay. Let's have a look at the challenges. And again, I'll go back to, this is not about being very heavy or very prescriptive. We're trying to stop anybody with the right to protest or campaign or hold particular views on particular issues. This is about us being able to acknowledge what's happening, acknowledge the infringements on staff and clients, and being able to balance those rights equally.
Okay, and finally, the criminal offences established in Clause 6, it may be difficult to prove and open to a great deal of interpretation, as I mentioned before. So how do we define offending behaviour which influences someone's decision making?
Okay. Well, I think that in the AFM, you should find a list of prescriptive behaviours and actions. This is about stopping people being recorded without their consent. It's about, what's being classed as street counselling. So those lists of behaviours are there. But if you think, Jonathan, as a few other members have raised during the session here, that that needs to be a bit more prescriptive, or those behaviours need to be further identified, I'm absolutely more than happy to have that conversation with you and see if we can make that a wee bit sharper, so that there is no I'm
just thinking, there's various circumstances where behaviour cause alarm or distress, but it's not criminal.
Oh, absolutely.
There's
absolutely it can. In my experience, these behaviours that is happening, I mean, I've given the example already during this session of one woman who was so distressed that she ran into 4 lanes of oncoming traffic. I have many other personal experiences of the impact of these behaviours on women. There has been research done to show that the psychological harms that are being done and the longevity of those impacts as well. I would be more than happy to share that with the committee if you so want. It was research that was carried out in Australia as they were getting ready for their legislation as well. And I think that we've, all heard personal testimony from a lot of staff and a lot of clients, a lot of women, a lot of their partners, and a lot of the people escorting them and attending sessions with them as well, about the impact that this does have. It's, people, when they're trying to access the services, are not really thinking about wider political context or societal context. They're thinking about themselves and accessing the services that they need, whether that be counselling, whether that be information, whether that be, clinical help. There's so much. And yet when they're met with these behaviours on the streets, it has a severe impact.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm going then to Alan. Go ahead, Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. Claire, I fully support the intentions of this proposed bill. I think what we have witnessed over recent years has been appalling and unacceptable harassment. And indeed, even in recent days, we've started to see it around vaccination clinics. People should be able to seek medical treatment or advice without having to face intimidation. So I certainly look forward to this bill progressing through the system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. A couple of other ones just that I wanted to touch upon. Are there any financial implications, or what would the financial implications be? Clearly there would be some. What's your view of the financial implications of the bill?
Yeah, and I think the EMF set out as far as I could go, really, I suppose, with the financial impacts. there's not a directly comparable figures that we can kind of put on that, but I go to the cost maybe with Ealing Council, and they were the first maybe to bring it in England with those protections, and so as of 2019 in Ealing Council, it was estimated that in total the order had cost approximately £250,000, and that was largely dealing with challenges through the courts, and I think that goes back to the questions that Jonathan was raising there as well about people's freedom to challenge that. So that, and I think in the EFM, I also go on that the model for designating safe access zones in Northern Ireland will aim to provide such zones for protected premises at an early juncture. So the resource cost in trying to establish what that zone would be would come from the department's sort of human resource, and we don't expect that would be a huge financial burden in any way, shape or form.
Okay, thank you. And the final one for me then, Claire, is your own thoughts in relation to the distance. And I understand this is for the department to bring forward, but just from your experience, and it actually has been very helpful and very harrowing in terms of your direct experience, and I think that's very welcome as sponsor of the bill that you have that experience. And I want to acknowledge my own views and my own agreement with you that is absolutely unacceptable, that an entire range of people who are trying to access health services and staff would be subjected to that on an ongoing basis. So, in your experience, what's the distances that would be helpful here?
This was something we had to look at very, very carefully, and again, it goes back to my direct experience. So, premises have very different locations, geography and environments around them, and we are not. So when I was looking at what was happening in England, and they put, I think it was 100 metres, 150 metres, and we see that used quite often. In my opinion, that is not suffice for us here. Because the context is very different. So if we have services being delivered in a city centre premises, or maybe a more rural hospital or health trust premises, the geography around the premises is absolutely key, and therefore in some cases, for example, Informed Choices, an advisory and service is very, very different there from, so if a 100 metre zone was applied to all premises, what we'll find is that certain premises, that won't be enough. And that's why I want the department officials to be specific to the building, and then to take into account how a client would be, for example, able to get to a taxi, a bus, a car park, or they're not being watched or followed within that as well, and that's very, very different. So when we look at how these services are delivered in England, they're not within hospitals or NHS settings, that they would be carried out with private clinics or charities, Mary Stopes or BPAS, for example. So they would be largely residential settings. When we look at how that's going to be delivered in Northern Ireland, it's going to be within hospitals, within GPs, or health or aftercare services, counselling within other premises. So that's why when I was looking, so Mary Stopes, for example, was in the same street as Informed Choices, or the Family Planning Association as it was at the time. But even in the same street, the geography around both buildings was very, very different. And even staff accessing car parks, for example, was very, very different as well. So I think that those unique circumstances need to be accounted for in order to make sure that safety is what's being provided rather than just a zone, if that helps.
No, that does make sense. Okay, listen, I want to thank you, Claire, for coming today, for presenting to the committee the principles and outlining your bill in that sense, and for taking members' questions and addressing those, and indeed particularly your commitment to looking at some of the specific issues that members have raised, and to see how those could be maybe looked at from a view of even improving the bill. So thank you for that, Claire, and all the best for the time ahead.
Thank you, Chair and members, and more than willing to have any conversations or further meetings if any members require. Thank you.
Thank you, Gora Mayagat. And members, I'm going to take a quick short break there, just a comfort break for members before we go to Stephanie. So could we resume again at 11:35? Thank you.
Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber.
Okay, members, so we're now resuming our public session at item 8 there, which is the organ and tissue donation deemed consent bill, consideration of the bill, timeline and extension. I refer members to the clerk's memo at tab 8.1 of the pack and to the draft motion to extend the committee stage at tab 8.2. Members, the call for evidence for this bill closed on the 24th of September. We now need to decide who we wish to invite to give oral evidence to assist our consideration of the bill. We should also decide on whether or not we wish to request an extension of the 30-day committee stage period. So I would just ask the clerk at this point to give a brief overview on the responses, and then I'll go to members to seek your views. So, clerk, please go ahead.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chair. Just the outline in relation to the organ and tissue donation. We received a total of 11 responses from organisations. Of those 11 responses from organisations, they were in favour of the bill being brought forward, and we also received around 19 responses from individuals. The vast majority were not in favour of the bill being brought forward, and that was from individuals. So I think there was probably about 16 against the bill and 3 in favour of the bill. But all those responses are available in your bill packs for that one, so you can have a read through them and see. In relation to the committee's consideration of evidence, you'll be able to see all the responses there, like I said, and I've had a look and I'm happy to make recommendations on who we should invite up for oral evidence. I'm happy to do that now or by email, and then if members have any others, in addition to that, we can certainly look at scheduling. But as the Chair said, this is one of many bills, and we do need to try and be as tight as we can while making sure we get the evidence in that's required. So, Chair, I'm happy either to mention those that certainly I would recommend that we bring forward, and then if members have any other.
Well, yeah, I think do go ahead, please, clerk, and outline those that you think from the evidence.
Well, from the evidence that we've received, certainly we would be keen to get the trusts up to give evidence. The British Medical Association, the NHS Blood and Transplant UK, the Public Health Agency, and Kidney Care UK. Also, the Donate for Dahi campaign, which has been very central in bringing this forward. Again, the recommendations are based on, there's some information in those submissions that maybe suggest possible recommendations. The likes of the Trust and the PHA are going to be instrumental in the promotion side of it. So, we'd be keen to hear from them, but certainly happy to take any other views from members if there's any other organisations that you wish to hear from.
No, well, I certainly think those are all absolutely relevant, and I do agree with you on the Donate for Dahi. In relation to the Donate for Dahi, I know that the BHF had been quite centrally involved and worked alongside them, so maybe they would be another one for consideration. But I'm happy to hear from members as well, if there's any views on what the clerk has outlined or any other ones from that list. I think members are broadly content with that, clerk. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, members, then in view of the workload that we're dealing with on committee, it is proposed that we seek an extension to the 21st of January. Apologies, Jerry, I'll go back to you first. I was to take you on.
No, just the organisations are fine, sure, just about the dates, kind of.
Yeah, well, so I was going to suggest an extension to the 21st of January 22, but aim to report before that date if possible.
Yeah, just clarity on that, maybe to yourself, Keith, or Clerk, sorry. I mean, obviously everybody wants to see us go through as quickly as possible. I think that's a given from the committee's perspective and view on the bill. Currently, if I read it correctly, we have the report on the 8th of November, if that's correct. So it's to extend that. So my only concern, Chair, is that, you know, I appreciate you say we want to report before the 21st of January, but like where would that leave us in terms of, you know, the bill going through to consideration stage and then further consideration stage? Will I give it time for the full bill to pass? So in theory, not opposed to extension, but I just have a bit of clarity needed around that.
Well, certainly I've had discussion with the Bill Office in relation to extensions, because we have a number of bills. They had sort of indicated the end of January would be the latest that would allow all the bills to get through their relevant consideration stages. In relation to this one, I'd suggested some sort of staging process, because, you know, we are in January where we've maybe 4 or 5 different reports on the go. You know, it's just, rather than push them all to as late as possible, some sort of staging process. In relation to this one, when we talk about the autism one next, I'm hopeful that we will be able to report before Christmas and report early, but that extra couple of weeks in January just gives us a wee bit of leeway in case there are some issues that come up. But I've been advised that if we report in January or by the end of January, then that will allow the time for it to go through the next stages.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Pam, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was more, I don't have any issue with the proposed extension dates. I think that's absolutely fine. I just wanted to, at this point, declare an interest as being the bill sponsor of the private member's bill on autism. Just to be very clear, obviously, in my committee role and my role as bill sponsor, I just wanted to declare that interest.
Yep, okay, thank you. So I'll just then sign off on the, Alan is indicating. Go ahead, Alan. We're not hearing you, Alan, just...
Sorry, that's it now. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. You know, just a quick question, Mr. Chairman, on, you know, we're saying that we might be able to report quicker than that date in January, but does that have any knock-on effect? I presume the Bill Office, that they'll be planning their schedule of work for January and trying to expedite things and make sure that everything does go through before the end of the mandate. If we did come back earlier, does that, as I say, does that present any problems for their time and their work programme?
Okay, I'll just check with the clerk on that, Alan.
Thanks, Chair. No, Alan, once the committee reports and signs off its report, it's then down to the department to schedule the consideration stage. So it'll be down to the department to liaise with the business office to find a date. My discussions with the Bill Office have just been in relation what's the latest we could report that would allow it to get through its stages. But once we report, it's down to the department to schedule the next stage.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, members, then it is proposed that we seek an extension to the 21st of January 2022, but aim to report before this date if possible. Are members agreed? Great, thank you, members.
Great.
Moving on then to the Autism Bill, consideration of Bill timetable and extension, and I refer members to the Clerk's memo, which is at tab 9.1 of the pack, and to the draft motion to extend committee stage at tab 9.2. Members, the call for evidence for this bill closed on the 24th of September. We now need to decide who we wish to give oral evidence to assist with our consideration of the bill. We should also decide on whether or not we wish to request an extension to the 30-day committee stage period. So once again, I would like to ask the Clerk to give a brief overview of the responses, and then I go to members for their views. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say that there hasn't been a great response in relation to this call for evidence. So far, we've only received 3 responses from individuals. I have received telephone calls from the National Autistic Society and the Human Rights Commission, who have said they're going to get responses into us in the coming days. So again, once they come, I'm happy to forward them on to members to have a look at. In relation to briefings moving forward, we've provisionally scheduled the department to come and brief us on this bill before the end of October, just to get their views on the bill, and then we'd also probably look to schedule the trusts, and then it would be down to the committee to decide whether it wishes to hear from those organisations such as the National Autistic Society and the Human Rights Commission once those responses come in. Again, the committee can decide other organisations that it wishes to hear from. So at the minute I'm working on the basis that we have the department up, we'll organise the trust to come up and give evidence, and then depending on the responses from the National Autistic Society and the Human Rights Commission, we'll probably schedule them if the submissions are forthcoming.
Yeah, would members be broadly in agreement with that? I do see an indication from Jonathan. I'll go to Jonathan first and then I'll go back to any other members. Jonathan, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. And can I suggest the names of two researchers from Ulster University that I think should be invited to give evidence? Keith, they probably haven't been in touch, but Professor Lawrence Taggart and Professor Roy McConkie, they're both heavily involved in autism research, and Professor Taggart is the lead of the Autism Research Hub at at Ulster University. So could I put forward their names for evidence, please?
Yeah, members content? Yeah, I don't know either of the individuals, but certainly I have no issue with that. If they have expertise in relation to this, I think it would be welcome. So members content with that proposal, and also with the broad outline as indicated by Keith, that we will await those responses, and then we can see about finalising that invite list for oral evidence. Members content? Yep, thank you. And so members, then we have scheduled the department to brief the committee on this bill on the 21st of October, just for members' information. Again, members, in view of the heavy workload, it is proposed that we seek an extension in relation to this bill to the 14th of January 2022, but again, that we would aim to report before that date if possible. So would members be content, and are members agreed? Yeah. Thank you, members. Okay, members. The next 5 agenda item then, members, are all SL1 policy proposals and all relating to smoking. Department officials are here, and are here. Clerk is indicating they are here to brief the committee on the proposed SRs, and we will then consider each SL1 in turn. So I would now like to welcome via video link Mr. Brian Dooley, who is Head of Health Improvement Policy Branch. Good afternoon, Brian. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
and
Brian.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, Brian. We're hearing you clear there, and thank you for that. We're hearing you loud and clear. And also to welcome Miss Karen Oldham, and Carol is Tobacco Control Lead, Health Improvement Policy Branch. Can you hear us okay, Carol?
I can, Chair. Thank you. Yes.
Karen, I should have said. So thank you, Karen, and welcome to the committee again. So I would invite the officials then to brief on the first batch of SL1s, which is agenda items 10, 13 and 14, and then we'll take members' questions, and then we'll ask you to brief on agenda items 11 and 12, Brian and Karen. So if you could go ahead and brief on items 10, 13 and 14, and then we'll take members' questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair and committee members. We are here to discuss the proposed making of 5 sets of regulations. As outlined in the SL1s, these proposed regulations relate to the introduction of new offences relating to smoking in private vehicles when children are present, and banning the sale of e-cigarettes to under 18s. A commencement order will also be required to commence the relevant sections of the Health Miscellaneous Provisions Act, Northern Ireland 2016. So I will start with the age of sale NIPS regulations. These cover agenda items 10, 13 and 14 in your agenda. The sets of regulations we propose to make, which introduce offences relating to restricting the age of sale of nicotine inhaling products, mainly e-cigarettes, so as to make it an offence to sell such products to under 18s. It will also be an offence to purchase such products on behalf of a child a proxy purchasing offence. These offences mirror current offences relating to tobacco sales. E-cigarette use... Sorry?
No, there was nothing from this side, Brian. We were hearing you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Great, sorry. E-cigarette use has been estimated as being significantly safer than tobacco use in a 2015 Public Health England report, which has subsequently been updated. However, the relevant newness of these products means that the long-term effects of inhaling the chemicals present in e-cigarettes is still unknown. While e-cigarettes do not contain many of the harmful components of tobacco, they do contain nicotine. Nicotine is highly addictive, and according to the World Health Organization, exposure to nicotine while still in adolescence can lead to long-term consequences for brain development. As a result, WHO recommends that the sale and/or distribution of e-cigarettes to minors is banned. In addition to the potential long-term health implications of e-cigarette use by teenagers, there are also concerns that they may act as a gateway into smoking. Youth smoking prevalence in Northern Ireland has been steadily decreasing in recent years, and the Department does not wish to see this trend reversed by young people who may not have been induced initially to smoke tobacco, becoming addicted to nicotine through e-cigarettes. Whilst the evidence on such a gateway effect is admittedly inconclusive, it is right that we are cautious where children's health is concerned. The principal regulations we are proposing are the Nicotine Inhaling Products Age of Sale and Proxy Purchasing Regulations Northern Ireland 2021, which introduced the minimum age of sale for nicotine inhaling products. A nicotine inhaling product is defined as a nicotine inhaling device, which is further defined as a device which is intended to enable nicotine to be inhaled through a mouthpiece, regardless of whether the device is also intended to enable any other substance to be inhaled through a mouthpiece. A nicotine cartridge, which is further defined as a cartridge which contains a substance which consists of or contains nicotine but is not tobacco and is intended to form part of a nicotine inhaling device, or nicotine refill substance. This is further defined as containing nicotine and intended to be used as a refill in a nicotine inhaling device. The regulations introduce the further offence of proxy purchasing, whereby it will be illegal for an adult to buy these products on behalf of a child. This mirrors the existing offence relating to tobacco and cigarette papers. The regulations allow exceptions for medicinal products which are indicated for the treatment of under 18s. The enforcement will be by tobacco control officers and district councils as part of the current contract with PHA for tobacco enforcement. Fixed penalty notices for selling to under 18s for the offence of proxy purchasing will be £250. This is consistent with fines for the comparable tobacco offences. Court issue fines are set at level 5, which is £5,000. Schedule 1 of the Health Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2016, which will also be commenced, which integrates the sale of nicotine inhaling products into the existing enforcement regime relating to the persistent commission of tobacco offences. A person or a business found to be repeatedly selling nicotine inhaling products to children could receive a restricted sales order or a restricted premises order from the court. Such an order can prohibit the sale of a nicotine inhaling product by a named individual or a business premise for up to 3 years. 2 further sets of regulations will be required to complete the regulatory framework. The Tobacco Retailer Fixed Penalty Amount Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2021 will also be subject to the draft affirmative assembly process. These regulations replace the schedule to the Tobacco Retailer Fixed Penalty Amount Regulations Northern Ireland 2016 to allow for the inclusion of amounts of fixed penalties for offences relating to the sale or proxy purchase of nicotine inhaling products. The second additional set of regulations are the Tobacco Retailer Fixed Penalty General Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2021, which is subject to negative resolution and provide for amendments in the form of a fixed penalty notice which may be issued under Section 12, subsection 1 of the Tobacco Retailers Act, Northern Ireland 2014, to include an offence under Section 1 of the HMP Act 2016, i.e. these new age of sale offences. We're happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I note within the document it states that there was a wide consultation done, a total of 28 responses, and overwhelmingly in favour of such restrictions. But could you indicate what the issues that weren't in favour, what the issues were being raised by those who weren't in favour, albeit that those were a very, very small proportion of the response?
From my memory, the reasons that were raised were by members of the tobacco industry. Karen, do you have any more detail on that? It may have been in relation to freedom of choice, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Sorry, there was general agreement, and I think the questions were around were people content with the definitions and the like, and the feedback was fairly positive. A minority of respondents argued that preventing parents from purchasing nicotine replacement products such as e-cigarettes for children to try and help them stop smoking was questionable, but it was a small number. Just checking what else was said. Regulations. Yeah, I think the only other, it sort of deviated into issues then about whether any sort of nicotine product should be available to children. So in terms of the definitions and the offences around proxy purchasing and the age of sale restrictions themselves, it was largely supportive. The main issue maybe was around that point about whether parents should be able to buy e-cigarettes for their children.
Thank you, and I think actually, and I do agree. I think there is a concern around. I would certainly have that concern around the gateway issue that you had mentioned, Brian, especially for younger people, and I think it's hugely worrying and hugely concerning that we would see any increase, especially among those younger people who in later years invariably, I believe, come to regret it and the impacts on health and all of that. The other question I wanted to ask before I go to members, and there's a number of members indicating, was around, you had referenced there that enforcement would be, I think you had said, done by council officials, similar to other legislation. Is enforcement also in the hands of the PSNI, or is it only council officials on these SL1s, Brian?
No, police also are involved, in my understanding.
Sorry, I'll maybe just interrupt there. I think we're maybe talking about the other ones, the smoking cars ones there where police are involved. For these ones, it will be just councils.
And is that the norm, Karen? Is that what applies across other jurisdictions?
Yes, other jurisdictions have a slightly different setup in terms of their training standards role, but for us, most enforcement is for tobacco is sort of carried out by councils. We are introducing that with the smoking in cars, and so it will come to shortly. The role of the PSNI, which is unusual for us.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to go then to members, and I have Paula, Pam, Jerry and Alan. So Paula, go ahead please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this update. I'm actually thrilled to see these coming before committee today, and the All Party Group Chair on cancer, and it's something we've been campaigning for years, so it's delightful to see them coming before us today. I just have two questions in terms of smoking in private vehicles. It states that the commencement date for the regulations is January 2022. Do you think that that's realistic? And are you going to put in place a communications plan? Because I'm sure that there'll be a lot of drivers and a lot of parents who will probably miss this. Or is there going to be some sort of grace period, maybe as this beds in? And the second question is in relation to the actual fine. I see on the NI Direct website there that the fine for smoking in work vehicles, for example, is £50, but it's reduced to £30 if paid within 15 days. And I'm just wondering, is it the same penalty, and whether there will also be the ability for people to pay less? Because quite frankly, £15, it doesn't seem like a lot of money to some people, and they may just flout it anyway. So I'd just like some insight into those two issues. Thank you.
I'll let you go first, Karen.
Yeah, okay. Yes, in terms of the bringing into force date, Paul, I think, we're aiming for early next year. I think the likelihood is just from the run of events that it maybe be pushed into February. That's with a fair wind and, with an executive paper, etc. to do on these. So all things being equal, we would hope that will be able to make it in February. In terms of the publicity, yes, once in the hope that we get Assembly approval, our intention would be to run a publicity campaign. We're currently talking to the PHA about that, and I know you're talking about the smoking in cars ones in particular. However, we will be sort of doing awareness raising around the age of sale ones too. The plan would be to run something in the region, we're still to confirm the details of this, but run something in the region of a 6-week sort of lead-in period. And for the smoking in cars, it would quite likely involve sort of TV and radio adverts and outside advertising as well. In relation to the e-cigarette age of sale ones, the councils will be doing some work with retailers on those as well. And obviously the usual press releases, etc. from the department. Sorry, your second question was about the payment. Sorry, the FPN, and yes, it is a sort of in line with the tobacco, similar offence for tobacco. I haven't. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the reduced amount. There is a reduction for early payments, as there is, I think, most FPNs. I'm not quite sure what it reduces it to off the top of my head, but there will be that option of early payment. Yeah.
But sorry, just on that then, I think I actually got it mixed up. It was £30 if paid within 15 days as opposed to 15 and 30. But does it then ramp up, if we have people who pay it and then the next time they get another offence, is there the potential for it to keep ramping up if people are dismissive of a £30 fine?
For the smoking in cars ones, no, there isn't a sort of a ramping up or a sort of staging process as far as I'm aware. The age of sale ones is slightly different because that's I feel like a penalty for retailers, and retailers can then, as I think as Brian sort of mentioned, fall under the restricted sales, restricted premises provisions in the Tobacco Retailer Act, whereby if they commit, I think it's 3 offences, they could be sort of stopped from selling the products for a period of time. So they're slightly different, but no, the others are very much in the same. The smoking in private vehicles ones are very much in the same lines as the current provisions for workplace and public vehicles.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And I'm aware there's a wee bit of overlap there in relation to the next one on vehicles, but we will be coming back to that in more detail as well. And thank you for addressing those questions. I'm going then to Pam. Go ahead, Pam, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Brian and Karen. So, Chair, just for clarity, we're looking just at items 10, 13 and 14 for now?
Yes, and then we'll come back to items 11 and 12 following a briefing from the officials. Yep.
That's grand, thank you. No, just to say, really, as a party, we absolutely support this move. I suppose the only thing I would say is it's a bit disappointing it's taken so long, given that we've been talking about this for an incredibly long time. And I think probably as far back as 2014. So I just wondered what's taken so long to get to where we are with these changes. And I also wanted to ask you if the trends in young people purchasing these products, if that has been recorded by the department.
I'll make a start on that first question anyway. The delay, the primary legislation came in 2016, the Royal Assent, and we began to work on this just before the Assembly went down. The consultation happened in January to March 2017, and the Assembly went down in January. We did ask our legislative branch if we could still proceed with the regulations because we thought there was a public interest, but they told us at that time that they didn't believe we could. So when the Assembly came back in January of last year, at that point members of our team were involved in the Brexit preparations. So And then, of course, we had COVID. So there was a brief period in about June of this year where we were released and we were able to progress the regulations, which is why we're at where we are now. So, yeah, we're sorry that it's taken this long, but unfortunately, a lot of things have happened. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your second question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brian, and appreciate your answer. Yeah, it was more in and around whether there has been recording of the trends in young people purchasing the products. You know, has that been recorded by department or any of its agencies?
Well, I think there's been information around the usage of young people in Northern Ireland around e-cigarettes. Karen, you might know the details, but I think there's been sorry, I'll let Karen answer.
Sorry, we do ask the question about usage in the Young People Behaviour and Attitude Survey, and the last one of those was run in 2019, and that showed that 3% of 11 to 16-year-olds were saying that they used e-cigarettes regularly, which is defined as at least once a week, and that's sort of similar to the tobacco cigarette usage. I think that figure, and I don't have the breakdown of it all, but the figure does sort of fluctuate between the 11s, who are maybe quite low on that percentage, and getting up to the 16s, where it escalates slightly. But as an average, you're looking at 3% using regular.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Jerry?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, officials. Maybe a bit of a general question, maybe for Karen, but I'd appreciate it if you could give a bit of direction on this. But obviously, e-cigarettes aren't harmless, you know, as Brian and you indicated. But I remember reading the World Health Organization report from a while ago, basically indicating that, you know, about hundreds of millions of deaths could be prevented if smokers moved over to e-cigs. Again, they're not completely safe, but they're safer, if you will. So is there any kind of work or consideration done by the department to kind of wean people off cigarettes to move on to e-cigs as a way to kind of get them from smoking anything? Appreciate it's a bit of a general question, but just like to know if there's any consideration of that.
Yeah, it's a fairly topical question, if I'm honest. At the moment, the PHA's position on e-cigarettes is that if someone comes wanting to access cessation services for tobacco, and they want to use e-cigarettes as part of that, they won't be turned away. However, the general approach in our local cessation services is to try and use regulated sort of products, the NRT type products that are sort of tested and trialled for this. As you point out, there's a lack of evidence around the long-term safety of these cigarettes, and I think the position across the world is maybe slightly conflicted on this whole issue. There certainly would seem, for example, Public Health England are quite supportive of the use in cessation services. WHO and some of the sort of scientific bodies around the EU legislative framework are slightly more cautious about the use. So we, at the moment, don't necessarily encourage the use. We won't stop, if anyone wants help and they're using them, we won't turn them away. However, the recent NICE consultation on the guidelines for smoking does suggest that there should be an active conversation during cessation approaches, people approaching cessation services about the use of e-cigarettes and how they might be used. So that's something we will have to consider going forward. I suppose there is maybe a distinction to be made at this point between the use of e-cigarettes as a cessation tool and the sort of attractiveness to children who we don't want to be using them. As Brian outlined, the specific issues around sort of cognitive development and stuff in children have been highlighted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And Alan, go ahead, please. Just check mute, Alan, and come on ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would declare an interest at this stage in that I'm involved with a family business that does sell all these products, but I've always fully supported the regulations around the sale of these products, and anything that helps to stop young people developing a smoking habit has got to be a good thing. And I know that the staff in my store are very responsible. We constantly remind them of their legal responsibilities in terms of who they sell these products to. And we have extensive signage around the checkout area, which is a legal requirement to indicate that we don't sell to underage young people. But I'm just wondering, we do get a lot of young people, not a lot, but we get young people who will chance their arm and try and procure these items, and they are challenged and they are refused. We also have had instances of young people producing false ID, again, to try and fool the shop assistant into supplying them with these products. But I've often wondered, and I'm sure that there are reasons, but has consideration ever been given at any stage to making it an offence for an underage young person to actually try to obtain these products over the counter?
I'll take that one too. I'm not aware of that being considered. Certainly the legislation across the UK at the moment focuses on the offences being with the retailer or indeed with the proxy purchaser, if that's the offence you're looking at. But I'm not aware of that, and maybe there's a broader question there around sales of all age restricted products and whether or not there's something that can be done there. But at the moment we're not considering that. No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, that seems to be the questions, and that there has been a wee bit of overlap, so there may be some of the questions already addressed. But I will go back then to Brian and Karen to brief us on the additional two items. So that's agenda items 11 and 12. So I'll go back to yourself, Brian, initially.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll address the proposed smoke-free private vehicles regulations in Northern Ireland. They're covered in items 11 and 12 of your agenda. The Smoking Order 2006 made provision for the prohibition of smoking in certain premises, places and vehicles. It included regulation making powers to make certain vehicles smoke-free and regulations banning smoking on public transport and in work vehicles used by more than one person, and came into operation on the 20th of April 2007. The Health Miscellaneous Provisions Act Northern Ireland 2016 further provided powers to enable the Department to make regulations which would require private vehicles carrying children to be smoke-free. The rationale being that children and young people are more vulnerable to the harmful effects of secondhand smoke as they breathe more rapidly and inhale more pollutants per pound of body weight than adults. The Royal College of Physicians have reported that this can lead to increased risk of asthma, lower respiratory infections, middle ear disease, bronchitis, bacterial meningitis and sudden infant death syndrome, as well as reduced respiratory function. Of particular concern is the fact that children travelling in private vehicles are in a confined space and are not in a position of control, as they might not be in a position to insist on others refraining from smoking or making alternative transport arrangements. The proposed regulations therefore seek to extend the current smoke-free provisions in relation to smoking in public and work vehicles, and would make it an offence to smoke in a private vehicle where a person under 18 is present. When there is more than one person in the car and the vehicle is enclosed, it will also be an offence to fail to prevent smoking in a smoke-free private vehicle. Currently, district councils are the enforcement authorities in relation to smoke-free legislation, but these draft regulations provide that the PSNI are designated as an additional enforcement authority in relation to vehicles. The principal regulations are subject to the draft affirmative assembly process. Subject to the necessary approvals, we would hope to have them operational by early February next year. Under current legislation, a fixed penalty notice can be issued for the offence of smoking in a smoke-free place. However, a person accused of failing to prevent smoking in a smoke-free place would be referred directly to the courts. This rule introduces provisions to allow an FPN to be issued where such an offence is in relation to a private vehicle. In terms of the amounts, the current FPN system is mirrored, so both offences would be subject to a fixed penalty notice of £50. Should a penalty not be paid, or an individual chooses to take the matter to the courts, a level 3 fine, currently £1,000, would apply to a guilty person of the offence of smoking in a smoke-free private vehicle, and a level 4 fine, currently £2,500, would apply where the offence was failing to prevent smoking in a smoke-free private vehicle. An additional set of negative resolution regulations which amend the smoke-free premises vehicle operators and penalty notices regulations Northern Ireland 2007 will also be required, which provide that the driver of a vehicle is responsible for ensuring that smoking does not take place, and also replaces the original forms set out in Schedules 1 and 2 of those regulations with new fixed penalty notice forms. These forms introduce the words Enforcement Authority alongside District Council, as the Police Service of Northern Ireland will also be an enforcement agency in respect of smoke-free private vehicles. The new form at Schedule 2 also makes reference to the new offence of failing to prevent smoking in a private vehicle. Similar provisions already exist in Great Britain and in the Republic of Ireland. That's me concluded. Any questions, please?
Okay, thank you. So the first one then from me would be in relation to the enforcement of it, and you have mentioned there that both the PSNI and Council would be in relation to these particular ones would be both enforcement agencies. But in terms of smoking in the car, who is liable in terms of any enforcement action?
Do you want to go, Karen?
Yes, so if I understand the question correctly, there are two offences: the offences of smoking in a smoke-free vehicle and the offence of failing to prevent smoking in a smoke-free vehicle. So the driver of the car is always the one responsible for the offence of failing to prevent smoking in a smoke-free vehicle. And then there's the additional one where the person smoking is liable for an offence too.
Okay.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah, no, that does clarify it, and I think that is a useful clarification, Karen. The other issue then was in relation to the 26 counties. What's the around that issue? What's their legislation look like? It has been in place since the 1st of January 2016. Is that similar to what's in place in the south?
It is largely similar. So we did ask if there was any data on enforcement and usage, issue of FPNs, and they advised that their policies very much, and I think this is probably across the UK too, focused on change in behaviour with and being a deterrent with a lesser focus on fines. So we don't have a lot of more information about how it's working down there other than that, but it certainly is a similar system, yes. I think it's the Garda, though, I think, are the enforcement bodies in the south.
Yeah, and I suppose the purpose of that question being pointed in that direction is the fact that you could be on a journey where you cross over the jurisdiction line, and just around the issue of that, I think it's important that it's as coherent and as enforceable as possible, because again, I agree with all members. I think this is long overdue and welcome, and in terms of protection of young people in particular in vehicles. So I think it's important that it's clear and workable in that sense. Checking with members then, I know members have asked some questions already in relation to this. I have Jerry indicating, and then if any other members want back in again on these two particular SL1s, I'll bring you in, but I'll go to Jerry first of all.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks again. Just a question around the number of people, children and young people who will benefit from this regulation around the prevention of smoking in cars. Is there any indication about the number of people who will have reduced or no asthma attacks and all the medical conditions that Brian mentioned? I think generally as public health, that's an important question, but also to try and counter some of the possible or likely claims of the state interfering too much in people's personal lives and their cars and all that, which hopefully you won't see, but you might see some of this in response to this regulation. So is there any idea of numbers who will benefit from the regulation being made?
I'll just make one comment, and Karen will know more, but there was a youth person survey done where 18% of young people said adults were smoking in the family car. So you would presume then, with compliance with this regulation, potentially you could increase almost 20% of children who are exposed to smoking currently. I know that there have been other studies done in England in relation to other benefits from the introduction of the regulations. They did a post-implementation review looking at this, and there was some beneficial information around people admitted to hospital in relation to asthma amongst young children. Do you want to say anything else, Karen?
I'll maybe just pick up on some of the stuff you've already said, Brian, there. But yeah, I think, as Brian said, the young people behaviour and attitude survey sort of suggests there's a certain amount of exposure still happening. The health survey, 1921, suggested that 92% of adults who own a family car do not allow smoking when children are present. Either not at all or only whilst children are travelling in it. So that sort of suggests that there's already quite a compliance with what we're wanting here. The post-implementation review that Brian refers to in England found that there was a 72% reduction in self-reported exposure of second-hand smoke amongst children following implementation of the regulations there. And then, as Brian says, there was, I think this was actually an academic study looking at asthma that was carried out, and I think that was the University of Glasgow, and their findings were that there was a significant benefit to children that smoke-free vehicle legislation has had, and the reduction in asthma hospitalisations in preschool children was quite significant. I think it was maybe less clear in older children, but in those smaller children who maybe haven't got the options of leaving a car or making alternative transport arrangements, I think that's probably quite important.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I have Pam Cameron indicating as well. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for your briefing on this. It's very, very welcome. And my only real question around this would be if there's any difference between the powers that will be available to Council and PSNI. Is there any differentiation between those powers, or are they the same?
Karen will know more detail, but my understanding is that the police do have more power than the council in terms of being able to stop vehicles, for example, where they might see smoking. Do you want to elaborate on that, Karen? Or?
Yeah, I think that's the main point, really. In relation to vehicles, I should maybe just clarify that councils still retain the sort of, both councils and the PSNI will be responsible for smoke-free vehicles of all descriptions. Councils will still retain the powers in relation to smoke-free premises. So the PSNI have not acquired additional powers there. But as Brian says, in relation to vehicles, the important thing was that the PSNI have that capacity to stop a moving vehicle if they perceive an offence being committed. And whilst we're expecting that there will be relatively low levels of enforcement, hopefully because of the deterrent effect as much as anything, I think that's important, that we can intercept where needed. I think the other thing is that it'll probably offer sort of opportunities for councils and the PSNI to work together on sort of stopping cars, and maybe the council then intervening with the actual issuing of penalties, etc. But I suppose it's important to say that our regulations don't introduce any new powers for the police, other than the fact that they are now an enforcement officer for this. So whatever they currently do, or whatever they're able to do in relation to stopping vehicles, we haven't changed that. That's just we're sort of, if you like, piggybacking on their existing abilities in that respect.
That's great clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And also, just occurs to me there as well, does the 11 and 12, the smoking in vehicles, does that include e-cigarettes and e-tobacco products?
No, it doesn't. This is on the back of the smoke-free provisions that are already in existence under the smoking order, and those only refer to lit tobacco, so it doesn't include vaping.
And do you think that is something that will need amendment in the future, given what we've just discussed around improving regulation around the sale of e-tobacco products? Do you not think that may be remiss of us at this point, not to include it right from rather than catching up with it down the line, that we build it in now?
Sorry, there's a couple of things there. I suppose, firstly, we don't have the primary powers to do it at the minute. The smoking order, as I say, refers to tobacco, so it would require primary legislation for us to ban vaping in public places. Secondly, I think we have sort of, if you like, a wealth of evidence about the harm that can be caused by tobacco, second-hand tobacco. The position is slightly less clear in terms of second-hand vaping. There isn't the same degree of evidence there, but certainly I agree it's probably something that we need to keep under consideration and monitor.
Okay, thank you. And just more broadly in relation to that point, and I know you've provided us with a kind of a review of what exists currently in England, Scotland, Wales and in the South. But are there anything from their reviews that you have looked at or built into this in order to learn from any teething problems or technical issues that may have arisen in any of those jurisdictions?
There's, I think, the gist of most of the post-implementation reviews that we have seen is that works well from a deterrent point of view, and I think we're expecting that will be the same, or hoping that will be the same for us. In terms of technicalities, I know that in England there was some issues with their police forces issuing FPNs, so we do have a provision in our regulations that should it be necessary that the councils can sort of take over that part of the process, so there can be a transfer of cases between enforcement authorities. So there hasn't really been anything other than that, I suppose, that has caused us concern about the enforcement or the implementation in other jurisdictions. Okay, thank you. Okay, so members content then that we can allow Brian and Karen to go ahead, and we can have another discussion then if there's anything else that members wish to look at. Okay, no other indications, Brian and Karen, so thank you for coming along, for presenting and taking members' questions in relation to this, and if there's anything further we'll come back to you, but for now thank you and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, any thoughts on that or anything that members want to add in at this stage before we go to consideration of each of them individually?
Just a vaping question by yourself, Chair. It's an important point, so I don't know, do they have to make an SL1 or an SR further to kind of add vaping on if it becomes, evident that they're dangerous? I don't know, but just maybe if we can get a bit of information from the department on that, I think it would be useful.
Yeah, and I did appreciate that Karen was saying that there was maybe not the same evidence, although she was also probably reacting to something that was brought up at the last minute. But can we put that forward as a suggestion to ask for more work, or ask for that to be scoped or whatever? Is that possible?
In relation to smoking in cars?
Yeah. That e-tobacco products would be a consideration would be given to including those in the cars, in the vehicles. That's what I was getting at there. All right. Anything else, members? And then, if members are broadly content, I'll go through them individually as we normally do for agreement. So, whenever I'm going through that, do I need to make that? Do I need to put that at the end of it, Keith?
No. If we've agreed that,
that's
fine.
Okay. So, item 10, members, then, is SL1 nicotine inhaling products, age of sale and proxy purchasing regulations NI 2021. I refer members to the papers at tab 10 of the pack. Are members content that the department make the statutory rule? Content, thank you, members. Item 11, SL1, the smoke-free premises, vehicle operators and penalty notices amendment regs NI 2021. I refer members to the papers at tab 11 of the pack and ask members, are members content that the department make the statutory rule? Yep, members content, thank you. Item 12, SL1, the smoke-free private vehicles regulations 2021. I refer members to the papers at tab 12 of the pack. Are members content the department make the statutory rule? Content. Item 13, SL1, the tobacco retailer fixed penalty amount amendment regulations NI 2021. I refer members to papers at tab 13 of the pack and ask members, are you content that the department make the statutory rule? Content, thank you. And item 14, SL1 tobacco retailers, fixed penalty, general amendment regulations NI 2021. I refer members to your papers at tab 14.1 of your pack in relation to that. Are members content that the department make the statutory rule? Content, thank you. Thank you, members. So moving on then to items of correspondence, and there's one item that I want to draw members' attention to, and then we can look at anything else that members wish to draw attention to. Item 15.6 is a delegated powers memorandum in relation to the Adoption and Children Bill. This memorandum identifies the provisions in the bill which confer new powers to make dedicated legislation. Are members content that the committee refer this to the Examiner of Statutory Rules for her scrutiny? Yep, members content. And have members any comments they wish to make in relation to any of the other correspondence in today's pack? Carol, go ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's just I want to come back to the Dr. Watt inquiry panel, but I also see in relation to the item that you raised, I think when we're doing our clause by clause, after it's sent to the Examiner of Statutory Rules, when we're doing our clause by clause consideration of the Adoption and Children Bill, that we have this running alongside it, because, you know, even just reading it, I'm assuming that RQIA are the body that will be used to examine whether a facility services are fit for purpose, etc. And I just have concerns about that, and also concerns that it is the department's opinion that a lot of these are non-controversial, and that's fine, but some of them I think may be. So when we get it back from the examiner, that we use that when we're examining our clause by clause.
Yep, thank you, Carol. And then on the neurology, you said you wanted something on that?
Yeah, so Chair, appreciate the committee's support, and the committee have been very supportive. But I do think, just to kind of elaborate on it, I do think it is appropriate that we do get the inquiry team in as soon as we can. And I also think it's appropriate that, given what you outlined in chairperson's business, that without, you know, like any drama, for want of a better term, that we do ask the Minister and the Department to respond to the fact that Dr. Watt has removed himself voluntarily off the register to practice medicine. But where does that leave? Where does that leave people? Because there's three processes: the complaint, the recall, and then there was a public inquiry. I think we need a complete overview in terms of update on where it's sitting, because it has caused crisis in services. And lastly, Chair, the neurologist was on, I think it was on one of the programmes the other morning on radio, talking about the massive waiting lists and that. And I just think that adding up into real concern about trusting the services that are there, and none of us want to be in that position. So I would impress that we do need to get something from the Minister and the Assembly.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, that actually brings to mind something that was mentioned in that meeting that I mentioned earlier yesterday. It was stated at that meeting that at the outset of this process, it was made very clear that those who were impacted by the recall would have priority appointments arranged for them, so that they wouldn't go back onto lists. I heard yesterday directly that has not been the case, and that people are being referred back to their GP, back onto what are now up to 6-year waiting lists. So actually I think there is an issue there that we should write as well to the department and ask them to outline how they have protected those appointments and how they're ensuring that those who are impacted by this recall are not being disadvantaged further by being put back into the system again unfairly, where really this was an issue of poor care being delivered. Would members be content that we include that element of it? Thank you. Jerry?
Yeah, Chair, same issue but different agenda point. Is that okay?
Okay, well, first of all, and then get agreement that we have agreed a number of issues in Chair's business. Clerk, are you clear enough that you have and I think there's broad committee agreement around those points. So I'll come to you then, Jerry. Thank you.
Thanks, and I agree with Carol's points, and my experiences in the last few days that people have been speaking with, apologies and Mr. comments earlier, but you know, devastation about the news. In 1518, there's a suggestion that we may have the power through the Section 44 of the Northern Ireland Act to call or request Dr. Watt appear to the committee. I don't claim to be an expert of the Act. Keith might, but just to suggest, the Chair, that I think families are feeling that there's no avenue for Dr. Watt to be asked, questions. So can I just suggest that the clerk or the officials can look into see if we can do that, how that operates, because it's something that only I was made aware of, I think, yesterday. But if we can explore that as a line of inquiry, I think that would be useful for us as a committee, but also the many people who are looking answers.
Yeah, clerks indicating, yep, I think that's, and members I think are content with that as well. Okay, thank you, members. Do members have any other comments to make on any of the correspondence in today's pack? I'll then go to the table paper, but in relation to the main pack, any other items of correspondence members want to flag up?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sorry, it's just for clarity. I mean, the 15.8 was the proposal that I had put forward, but the other issue in relation to the minister, that's it. Can we ask a minister to come to the House and make a statement, an oral statement?
Well, I think we'd already noted that. I'll just check with the clerk how that might be. Certainly,
the committee can request that the minister make a statement on it. If
we had agreed that earlier, Carol. We had agreed that during Chair's business that we would do that.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
That's on the record. Okay. So, any other items, members that wish to draw in the main pack? Highlight? No, I'm seeing nothing there, so thank you. And then in relation to the table papers, do members have any comments in relation to the table papers they wish to raise?
Chair?
Yes, Paula, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the gender identity clinic services, we've all had correspondence over the last few years around the horrendous waiting lists and the slowness in bringing forward the new pathway around that. I'm just wondering if we can get an update from departmental officials in relation to that, or whether we can invite them in front of us to give us a briefing, because it might affect a small number of people, but it impacts them very significantly, not least in terms of their mental health and well-being. So just want to flag up gender identity clinics. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Paula, and committee content with that as well, yeah. And also just in terms of the winter storage plan and the waiting lists issue that we had said we wanted to keep an eye on, I just want to check with the clerk what we have in relation to when we're next looking at the waiting list issue. Do you know offhand, clerk, or?
It was due to be sometime in November,
okay.
So it was. Okay. Just with all the other, as we'd sort of said before, we've sort of left enough room for one briefing a week. Leading up, so certainly that was one that was indicated we would try and put in certainly before Christmas.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Any other items in tabled papers, members? No, thank you. Okay, then moving on to item 16, which is around the forward work programme. Are members content to note the forward work programme as presented there? Yep, members are content. And then any other business, members, and I just want to raise one there that has actually, yeah, I'll come back to you, Carol. I actually am still picking up significant concern around the whole issue of daycare centres and respite, and it's very, very unclear when those will be going back to full service, or what alternative arrangements the departments are making other than simply restricting the amount of access that people have. I think that's a matter of huge concern, members. It runs alongside the lack of any additional support for carers, the lack of even a recognition for informal carers, a recognition payment. But I think we need to write to the department again. This is just drifting on for too long, in my view, and I think we should ask the department to urgently clarify what they are doing to restore full services. Would members be content? Yep. Yeah. Thank you. So any other business then from other members? Carol, an indication?
Yeah, sure. So I think it might be appropriate for us as part of the forward work programme to even hear from the ambulance service. I've had a couple of constituents and one who wasn't a constituent but ended up a constituent of mine raised the issue on their behalf. They were brought to the Royal with suspected serious cardiac failure. Now, they got excellent care from the paramedics, but they were in a queue in ambulances for anything from 5 hours to 6 hours. When they get into the Royal's emergency department, they were sitting there from 12 to 24 hours. Really, really sick people. The staff were completely overwhelmed with dealing with COVID patients, okay? But the only contact that those families had, thankfully, was by the paramedics, who they said were excellent. And even the staff in the Royal were very, very apologetic. But the families literally got on to me to say it was a disgrace that their families had endure those conditions. And also they felt that and parts of it, and they weren't there, but their families communicated to them that there was hardly any nurses on. So we've raised the issue about safe staffing loads of times. So I do think it would be important, Chair and committee members, to get a briefing from the paramedics, and also even again as we go into winter, a briefing from the Trust's chief executives about how they're going to deal with this. I mean, they're seriously ill people who were blue lighted, and that's what happened.
Yeah, I think it might be worthwhile actually taking in all of the trusts, including the ambulance trust, in terms of preparing for winter and scheduling something in. I think that is relevant. Clearly, we're seeing, and I think we're probably all picking up on issues across the system, starting possibly with ambulance and GP and all of that, and the delays in being able to decant patients as well is. So I think that would be a useful session as we go into the winter period, and predicting, as everyone is, that there will be further problems. So members content with that proposal? Yeah, thank you. Paula, Paula, I thought an indication from you, and I see a hand up from Pam. Paula, I'm just checking with you.
That was from earlier. I just quickly lowered it there. Sure, sorry.
No problem. Pam, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just in the back of Carol's points there too. Obviously, GP access is a huge concern, and I have met, along with my party leader, with BMA and Royal College GPs on this, but I would like to hear from the department what actions they are taking to assist GPs, or to encourage, or in terms of systems, in terms of MDT rollouts. We need to be doing more, because the access to GPs is incredibly difficult, and a perception that they are closed, which we know is completely wrong. We know GPs are working harder than they ever have had before, but there is that differentiation between the practices and how individual GP practices operate and what services they offer. So I do think we need to hear from the department on what they're intending to do to improve that access to GPs. So there'll be a big concern of mine going forward into the winter months that this will become even worse, and there is real worry that there are many people who are being missed. Serious diseases are being missed or not picked up on because of the difficulties in accessing GPs.
Yeah, and I have to say I agree with you, Pam. I've also met with both the colleges. I've met with individual GP surgeries. They are clearly under massive pressure as well, and patients are struggling massively to get appointments, and sometimes even to get phones answered. I have been carrying out a survey myself to try to get a sort of some idea of the scale of this. There's been a massive response to that survey, and I hope to be within the next few days hopefully able to report on that, and I would draw members' attention to it, including a number of suggestions that I think can help to support GPs in providing additional and appropriate levels of access to appointments. So hopefully that will be within the next few days. But I do agree with you that we need to hear from the department as to how they're stabilising that, so I think that's a useful call. Members, I think, are content with that proposal as well. Okay, members, so that is our meeting concluded today. All it leaves for me to do is to confirm date, time and place of next meeting. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, the 14th of October at 9:30 a.m. Thank you, members, and please take care. Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound.